Chapter 437. Arhat Rath was seen sitting cross-legged high up in the sky. Every now and then, a part of his body would collapse, exposing his white bones. However, in the blink of an eye, that part would be shrouded in a Buddhist light, and his flesh would quickly grow back. This happened over and over again. Parts of his body kept collapsing and rotting, only to be reborn amidst the Buddhist light. Grand and majestic chanting and shrill evil howls kept coming out from within Arhat Rath's body. When both of them mixed together, it made those who heard them feel as if a saw blade was spinning in their heads, making them feel extremely uncomfortable. Apart from the 5 heaven immortals who were killed by Arhat Rath and Patriarch Muji at the beginning, and those cultivators who came with them, more and more immortal sects and powers around Enhi city had arrived after receiving the news. However, when they saw the bizarre Arhat Rath from afar, just like Wu Qi and the other cultivators, these people who came later just watched from a distance of several tens of miles away. None of them dared to come close. Some cultivators with profound cultivation bases and extensive knowledge were explaining the mysteries of this place to their disciples in low voices. The strange appearance of Arhat Rath did not look like a fight between ordinary immortals and cultivators, who would unleash a myriad of thunderbolts, flame, boundless sword beams, magical clouds, and dazzling lights. But in fact, a fight like this was not dangerous at all. Unless they were like Wu Qi, who had a powerful immortal item like the Jade Bone's soul-searching flag, which could deliver a deadly strike to the enemy, killing them without giving them a chance to fight back. In a fight between heaven immortals like this, if they were not extremely unlucky, they would only suffer some injuries to their limbs, and would still be able to escape with their lives intact. As long as they returned to their cave abodes and recuperated for several tens of thousands of years, they would be back to being alive and kicking. After all, be it a fight of magical powers or flying swords or magical treasures, it was not easy for both sides to deliver a deadly strike to each other when they were fighting from a distance of several tens of hundreds of miles, and both of them were protected by immortal items of similar strength. Since they had all cultivated to the realm of heaven immortals, unless they were some prodigal sons like Lord Jade and Mr. Gold, which heaven immortal would not flee for their lives like a frightened rabbit once they were injured? Therefore, the more exciting the fight between heaven immortals was, the less risky it would be. On the contrary, although the fight between Patriarch Muji and Arhat Rath seemed to be silent, they were actually fighting with their lives on the line. Patriarch Muji had his body turned into a fiend, transforming into a beam of fiend light that shot into Arhat Rath's body. Arhat Rath simply opened his mouth wide and let Patriarch Muji fuse into his body. This was the two of them staking everything on one throw. They gave up on the pointless battle of magic and magical treasures, and directly used their lives to cultivate their last breath of vitality to fight. Using a mystic technique of the Buddhist League, Arhat Rath had transformed himself into a minor kiliacosm, using it to perform the endless transformations of the ancient times. He wanted to trap and kill Patriarch Muji in one fell swoop. On the other hand, the Patriarch was destroying all kinds of rules in the minor kiliacosm, using the divine ability of the Fiend League to give birth to endless sinful murderous aura, trying his best to destroy the world and plunge Arhat Rath into eternal damnation. A few old monks from Golden Pavilion Temple were standing around Arhat Rath and reciting some scriptures, which could clear up Arhat Rath's mind and increase his divine power to compete with Patriarch Muji. However, Patriarch Muji was trapped inside Arhat Rath's body, and the cultivation technique of the Fiend League was famous for its domineering power, danger, and ruthlessness. Therefore, he was able to gain the upper hand. The two of them were equally matched in this manner. Gradually, a few more celestial immortals rushed over. These few new heaven immortals were not from the various powers around Enhi city, but the immortals recruited by those immortal sects who had shops in Enhi city. These heaven immortals did not know about the mighty reputation of Patriarch Muji and Arhat Rath, and they were itching to make a move, hoping to take advantage of the situation. Right at this moment, a white cloud drifted over from afar. A burly old monk clad in a golden kasaya and holding a vajra staff in his hand flew over, together with tens of young monks. The old monk cried out from afar, "Fellow immortals, this item is fated with the Buddhist League. I hope fellow Taoists can sit here and watch." We, the Golden Pavilion Temple, will definitely repay the kindness you've shown us today in the future. Wu Qi was struck by a thought. He should be the abbot of Golden Pavilion Temple, right? Arhat Rath spent most of his time in secluded cultivation in minor serene Buddhist land. This abbot of Golden Pavilion Temple, commonly known as Grand Master Tiger Roar, was the representative of the Buddhist League around Anhui City. He had a cultivation base of 30th tier Heaven Immortal, and was an expert in all kinds of evil subduing techniques of the Buddhist League. He was a ferocious monk who wholeheartedly focused on killing to save the world. A few cold laughs rang out, as the 3 Heaven Immortals who had just arrived approached Grand Master Tiger Roar. They laughed together and said, "Fated with the Buddhist League?" I'm tired of hearing this phrase over the years. Let's see if we are fated to meet again in terms of magic power. Among these 3 Heaven Immortals, 2 of them had a cultivation base of 31st tier, and the last one had a cultivation base of 32nd tier. Although there was a gap between their cultivation base and Grand Master Tiger Roar's, the gap was not too big. Of course, they were not familiar with each other, nor did they have any friendship with each other. The reason why they approached Grandmaster Tiger Roar at the same time was that they wanted to join forces to deal with the strongest one first, and then settle the score among themselves. With a worried expression, Grandmaster Tiger Roar gave Arhat Rath a look, whose lower body had turned into green bones, and his upper body was shrouded in a Buddhist aura. Then, he quickly gave the huge Ganoderma underneath the slanting peak a glance. When he saw the hazy, white Ganoderma horse hiding in the depths of the Ganoderma, his eyes lit up abruptly. A strong gleam burst out from his eyes, making him look like a greedy wild wolf who had just seen a piece of fresh, bloody meat. Excellent! Excellent! Since you 3 fellow immortals refuse to come to your senses, let me show you a shortcut to liberation. From a distance, Grandmaster Tiger Roar threw out the Vajra scepter in his hand, transforming it into a 3-headed Wisdom King, who stood 100 feet tall and sat cross-legged on top of his head. Underneath Wisdom King was a red lotus throne, from which he unleashed a 1,000 feet long red lotus karmic flame that coiled around Grandmaster Tiger Roar's body. Grandmaster Tiger Roar gave a loud roar as he casually tore off his kasaya, revealing a vivid tattoo of a tiger descending the mountain on his chest. Following Grandmaster Tiger Roar's roar, beams of golden light shone from the tattoo of the tiger. Not long after that, a gigantic tiger, about 70 to 80 feet long, dashed out from Grandmaster Tiger Roar's chest, roaring and wheeling around him. Its several tens of feet long tail whipped the air and produced ear-piercing noises. The 3 Heaven Immortals' faces flickered, and they struck at the same time. One of them drew his sword and thrust it straight towards Grandmaster Tiger Roar's chest, leaving a 1-mile-long, 3-colored beam in the air. Another raised an umbrella and unleashed a large sheet of bright light to protect the 3 of them. The last one clenched both fists, with lightning flashing vaguely in his palms and ringing out clear and melodious thunderclaps from time to time. Although it was the first time the 3 of them worked together, by relying on the telepathic connection between Heaven Immortals, they were able to understand each other's cultivation techniques, allowing them to come up with a very ingenious cooperation. This was especially true for the Heaven Immortal who held the umbrella. His umbrella shot out a beam of white light, and a beautiful girl with a slender, naked body appeared, singing and dancing amidst the white light. Accompanied by the melodious singing, a great amount of water vapor kept rushing into the umbrella, condensing into countless crystal-clear snowflakes on its surface. Hexagonal snowflakes piled up and overlapped with each other, transforming into a thick ice shield that emanated a strong cold air around the 3 Heaven Immortals. Grandmaster Tiger Roar gave a cold snort and shook his head disdainfully. Sitting cross-legged on top of his head, Ming Wang waved his hand and slashed the demon-subduing sword in his hand at the approaching sword beam, knocking it several tens of miles away with ease. The ferocious tiger, who was running at top speed next to him, gave a loud roar, and with a blink of its body, it pounced towards the 3 Heaven Immortals. With a blink of its body, it came right next to the 3 Heaven Immortals as if it had teleported, slapping its paw forcefully on the ice shield. It looked like a single paw, but in Wu Qi's eyes, the tiger had slashed out at least several tens of thousands of times in just a split second. Furthermore, the power of those tens of thousands of paws had interwove with each other and finally turned into a single paw. It was a tremendous force that came from several tens of thousands of paws in a row. It was a miraculous technique that shocked even Wu Qi. He reckoned that even the current celestial fiend puppets would not be able to escape unscathed if they were slapped by this tiger. In fact, it was just as Wu Qi had expected. The tiger was also an excellent Buddhist item that Golden Pavilion Temple had refined day and night under the influence of the Buddhist energy. Later on, it was fused with the soul of a white tiger, and that was how it came into being. The ice shield was shattered by the paw, and the girl who was dancing and singing amidst the white light gave a moan. Suddenly, a few wisps of cold air sprayed out from her little mouth. Obviously, the attack had damaged her foundation. The three heaven immortals dodged hastily, but there was no time for them to do so. The tiger's paw slapped on their bodies and broke their bones and tendons, sending them flying backward at the same time. They cried out in pain at the same time, and no longer dared to attack Grandmaster Tiger Roar again. Instead, they simply spun and fled. However, before they could flee, Wu Qi had already activated the formation he had set up underground beforehand. With the help of the blind old man's spirit tea, 90% of the injuries on Wu Qi's body had healed, and his overall strength had improved to a new level. He pressed both palms on the ground, unleashing all the innate earth energies from his body and quickly communicating with the vicious formation underground, which only allowed people to enter but not exit. Fearing that the power of the formation was not strong enough, Wu Qi even mobilized the power of the acquired Earth Spirit Pearl, fusing the vast and boundless Earth energies into his own energy, then unleashed it at the same time. Magnetic Grand Magic. Wu Qi gave a deep snort. Suddenly, all the mountains within 100 miles of him trembled and collapsed at the same time, lying flat on the ground. The enormous amount of earth energies under the ground was quickly transformed into magnetic forces. A dark glow enveloped the entire ground, while the gravitational force in the surroundings suddenly expanded. In just a blink of an eye, it had increased by over 1,000 times. Whether it was Arhat Wrath, Grandmaster Tiger Roar, the three heaven immortals who were fleeing at top speed, or all the cultivators who were watching from several tens of miles away, none of them had expected such an unforeseen event. Their bodies suddenly sank, and they were sucked down to the ground in a sorry state. Amidst a series of cracking noises, the ground kept sinking, and in just a blink of an eye, it had sunk several tens of miles deep. Then, a loud boom rang out as the formation exploded. An enormous amount of underground fire energies surged out, sweeping across the surroundings with poisonous flames of the earth and enveloping all the people who were sucked into the ground. All cultivators below the realm of Heaven Immortal were instantly turned into ashes. Wu Qi waved his hand casually, causing the corpses of the few young men to fly out from the spirit breeding ring. Then, he cast out a few runes from the Tao of Ghost and Deity, covering these corpses with a faint layer of ghost energy. After that, he unleashed a few thunderbolts and charred all of them. Grabbing the unconscious Lu Yi, Wu Qi threw him next to the corpses of the few young men. After that, he kicked Lu Yi's forehead, shattering his brain like a piece of tofu. A stream of earth energies hit Lu Yi's palm, leaving behind a very strong aura of earth energies. After that, Wu Qi cried out in a deep voice, pulling Lao Ai and the others with him as he spun and fled. In just a blink of an eye, they had vanished without a trace using the escape art of earth. After a full hour, two wild roars were heard coming from the depths of the mountains. Damn it! Left Minister of Zhong Province, Yu Miao. Good, very good. When Wu Qi heard the roars, he lightly flicked his finger, activating the restrictive spell on the jade slip. A thunderclap rang out, and the jade slip exploded into pieces. With a cold grin on his face, Wu Qi thought to himself, I suppose there must be some mighty figure behind Arhat Wrath and Patriarch Muji. Yu Miao, oh, Yu Miao, I really want to see what you look like now. Chapter 438. In the depth of the mountain, the slanting peak where the Ganoderma immortals' remains once stood had completely sunk into the ground, leaving behind a huge pit that measured nearly 100 miles in diameter and was over 100 miles deep. Vaguely, a red light was seen bursting out from the depths of the pit. A great amount of lava shot whistling up into the sky, leaving a scorching trail in the air before slowly falling back down. Patriarch Muji and Arhat Rath hovered above the magma like two defeated roosters, staring at each other with their jaws tightly clenched. Both men were clenching their jaws so tightly that they produced cracking noises. Half of Patriarch Muji's body was glinting with a golden gleam, as if it was forged from pure gold. A faint shadow of a reclining Buddha could be seen hovering on top of it, while a very strong Buddhist aura kept rushing out from it. Arhat Rath's lower abdomen had turned into a pile of white bones, and there was a faint green mist lingering on his bones, emanating a brutal evil aura that made one shudder. Apart from the two of them, and Grandmaster Tiger Roar, who was hovering off to the side, there were no other cultivators around them. Wu Qi's desperate plan was too powerful. The underground energy veins had cracked, and the energies from a few of them had exploded in an instant. Apart from Patriarch Muji and Arhat Rath, all the cultivators present were burned to ashes by the lava. Even the few heaven immortals who were present could only survive the first wave of the underground flame, before they were turned into nothingness by the frightening heat waves that came after. All the people from Euphoria Heavenly Palace, Golden Pavilion Temple, and the various immortal sects around in his city who came here were all wiped out, leaving only the two of them alone, staring at each other viciously like two fighting cocks. On the other hand, Grandmaster Tiger Roar had all his meridians broken, and his spine broken into 70 to 80 pieces. He was just one breath away from death, and could be considered as a dead man. A huge crystallized Ganoderma rested neatly on a white cloud between them, emitting an alluring purple glow. Patriarch Muji suddenly coughed violently, coughing out mouthful after mouthful of blood. The blood he coughed out was translucent like a seven-colored glass, and was emitting a faint fragrance of sandalwood. Upon seeing Patriarch Muji's miserable appearance, Arhat Rath suddenly roared with laughter. But, after a few laughs, a large amount of sticky, pitch-black, foul-smelling blood gushed out from his mouth. Both men were fighting each other with the power of Source, and Patriarch Muji was trapped inside Arhat Rath's body. While both men were having a great time fighting, Wu Qi triggered the spies who were lying in ambush, dragging both men into the frightening heatwave produced by the eruption of the underground energy veins. Arhat Rath was troubled by Patriarch Muji on the inside, and he was threatened by the eruption of the energy veins on the outside. With both factors added together, he was immediately severely wounded. Left with no other choice, Arhat Rath gave up a part of his blood essence and released Patriarch Muji from his body. Taking advantage of the critical moment when Arhat Rath's suppressive force was suddenly weakened, Patriarch Muji unleashed a full-force attack with a vicious evil technique, nearly disintegrating Arhat Rath's fleshly body. The evil energy contaminated Arhat Rath's body, nearly contaminating his relic, and forcibly draining the magical power that he had cultivated painstakingly for a few periods. But, Arhat Rath did not let Patriarch Muji have an easy time. When Grandmaster Tiger Roar saw Arhat Rath was in a crisis, he immediately risked his life to save him, unleashing a desperate attack with all his cultivation base and energy essence. Together with Arhat Rath's counterattack, they gave Patriarch Muji a severe blow. Patriarch Muji had just severely wounded Arhat Rath and rushed out from his body. Right when he was feeling complacent, he was dragged into the frightening energy torrent produced by the eruption of the underground energy veins. After that, Arhat Rath and Grandmaster Tiger Roar joined forces to attack him. His body was invaded by the Buddhist energy, and half of his body was forcibly turned golden by the Buddhist energy. Patriarch Muji was a ferocious man by nature. Although he was severely wounded, he did not forget to use his second celestial fiend clone to severely injure Grandmaster Tiger Roar. As a result, he ended up in the current situation. Grandmaster Tiger Roar had completely lost his ability to fight, while Patriarch Muji and Arhat Rath could barely maintain their cultivation base of 33rd tier heaven immortals. However, their energy essence was depleting rapidly. If they were to fight again, perhaps both of them would lose their lives here. Laughing dryly, Patriarch Muji pointed at the remains of the Ganoderma immortal and said, "We've been tricked by Yu Miao. They want to take back the control of this county. We can't fight anymore, or else we'll all be in big trouble." How about we split it equally? Arhat Rath gave a touch of spirit jade powder in his palm, clenched his jaws and said, "You Miao, the left minister of Zhong province. He, someone will find him to settle the score. I've already informed my master about what happened here. I won't let it go just like that." Wiping off the dark blood from the corner of his mouth, Arhat Rath said in a deep voice, "So be it. You and I swear that the things inside must be distributed fairly, and no one can take advantage of them. I'm going to offer this rare treasure to my master. Don't you dare have any other ideas." Patriarch Muji glared at Arhat Rath, then grinned coldly and said, "You're acting like you're the only one who has a master. My ancestral master will also like this kind of filial piety. Let's make a vow to divide it equally. Whoever dares to take advantage of them will have their children and grandchildren become nuns and monks for generations to come. None of them will have an asshole, and the yin and yang will be reversed. All of them will give birth to a bunch of fucking freaks." Patriarch Muji's vow was vicious, and it made Arhat Rath's face twitch. He was too lazy to argue with this old monster from the Evil League, so he simply swore the vow. After all, he was a cultivator from the Buddhist League, and he would not have any descendants. Therefore, this messy vow would not bring him any harm. After making the vow, both men immediately came next to the crystallized Ganoderma. Very carefully, Arhat Rath pulled out a crescent-shaped blade about the size of a palm, then said complacently, "This is the blade that my master used to shave my head for the first time 300 reincarnations ago. After being infused with my Buddhist power for 300 reincarnations, this blade is no weaker than an ordinary middle-grade immortal item. It's just the perfect weapon to cut this thing open." Patriarch Muji snorted mockingly, twitching his lips and not wanting to talk to Arhat Rath anymore. Reverently, he raised the blade up high and recited a few incantations in a low voice. Vaguely, a golden gleam shone from his body, slowly seeping into the blade. Immediately, the tiny blade emitted a blinding light that looked like a bright moon, dispersing the thick smoke and raging flames in the surroundings and illuminating the area 100 miles around them. Holding the blade lightly, he swung it downward. It truly deserved to be the item that Arhat Rath had carried with him for 300 reincarnations, as it possessed an unfathomable magical power. The remains of the Ganoderma immortal, which no ordinary immortal item could cut open, were easily cut open by the blade. A fragrant aroma wafted out from the remains of the Ganoderma immortal. Patriarch Muji and Arhat Rath's eyes shone brightly, while Chi-Chi took a deep breath. They felt that the fragrance flowed through their 7 apertures, connecting their bones and meridians. It was as if there was a mercury-like stream of air flowing through their meridians. In the blink of an eye, they felt refreshed all over, and every pore was releasing a faint fragrance. The remains of the Ganoderma immortal truly deserve its reputation. The two of them took in deep breaths and felt warm all over. The wounds on their bodies no longer hurt, and they felt like they were floating in the air, as if they were going to dance in the air. Many illusions appeared in front of them, and they were all the strangeness of the Supreme Devil Realm or the solemn chi of the Supreme Pure Land that they usually saw when they were meditating. A muffled boom rang out, as the ball of liquid hovering in front of them suddenly exploded. The sticky liquid sprayed out and sprinkled all over their bodies. The sticky liquid was extremely poisonous. When it touched their bodies, it immediately squeezed into their bodies through their pores, bringing with it a strong aroma as it began to corrode their flesh and blood energy essence. What made Patriarch Muji and Arhat Rath panic was that the liquid had a very strong corrosive force to their fleshly bodies. Even their fiend bodies and dharma bodies could not withstand the invasion. On top of that, they had no idea where the aroma came from. Although it could not knock them unconscious, it had greatly hindered the flow of their fiend energy and Buddhist energy. They were already badly wounded and had less than 10% of their cultivation base left. Now, with the liquid entering their bodies and the strange fragrance suppressing their cultivation base, large amounts of white sticky bubbles kept rising from their bodies. Their muscles were rotting piece by piece, turning into a bone-chilling poisonous liquid. Deadly poison. Arhat Rath bellowed furiously. Shape-shifting in water. Obviously, Patriarch Muji had a very deep understanding of all the poisonous things under the heaven. He cried out sternly, "Even the body of a gold immortal cannot withstand the corrosive substance of extreme Yin. Quickly dive into the lava and disperse the Yin water with the heat from the earth's core. Otherwise, we will lose our immortal bodies." Furiously, Patriarch Muji reached out his hand and grabbed towards the white Ganoderma horse. Arhat Rath watched helplessly as Patriarch Muji grabbed the horse, and did not stop him. Patriarch Muji grabbed the Ganoderma horse, then squeezed it hard. A cracking noise rang out as the Ganoderma horse broke into countless white and tender pieces. "Fuck him." Patriarch Muji and Arhat Rath cursed furiously at the same time. "You Zong, how dare you humiliate us? Radish, how could you disguise yourself as a Ganoderma horse? Bastard. So what if you used a useless Ganoderma horse? Radish, how dare you humiliate us with a radish?" Patriarch Muji and Arhat Rath were so angry that their eyelids were twitching. They roared furiously and plunged into the lava that kept bursting out from underneath, sinking down with great difficulty. The underground fire element energy was very abundant. Both of them had to work hard to absorb the underground fire, and disperse the shape-shifting Yin water that was recklessly corroding their bodies. The shape-shifting Yin water was extremely vicious, and there was no way they could get rid of it in a short period of time. When Grandmaster Tiger Roar saw Patriarch Muji and Arhat Rath being tricked, he coughed out a mouthful of blood because of extreme anger. "Merciful Buddha, the branch of Golden Pavilion Temple has fallen today." Laughing bitterly, Grandmaster Tiger Roar said in a low voice, "I'll be reincarnated right now. I only hope that in my next life, I can still attain enlightenment, and enter the peaceful land of Buddha again." A beam of rainbow light shot out from between his brows, wrapping around a nearly shattered relic as it slowly squeezed out from his body. His fleshly body was shattered, and the relic was severely damaged. Therefore, Grandmaster Tiger Roar could only use what little remained of his cultivation base to protect a thread of his true spirit and reincarnate. With his foundation in this life, it would not take him many years to become an Arhat again in his next life. But suddenly, a bronze arm stretched out from beside Grandmaster Tiger Roar. A celestial fiend puppet darted out from beside Grandmaster Tiger Roar and grabbed the relic. Laughing ferociously, a clump of pitch-black and sticky fiend flame sprayed out. In just a blink of an eye, the puppet had refined Grandmaster Tiger Roar's relic, turning it into a powerful and pure force that fused into the puppet's body. Wu Qi's voice was heard coming out from the puppet's body. It was as light as a feather, like the whisper of a ghost. "Excellent. The area 1,000,000 miles around Anhe City is now a vacuum. It's the perfect time for me to show my strength." Chapter 439. 7 days later, Patriarch Muji and Arhat Rath finally crawled out from the magma with their severely wounded bodies. The underground energy veins on Pangu continent were extremely stable and strong. Although they were destroyed by Wu Qi, they soon began to adjust and recover themselves. In just 7 days, the collapsed crater had gradually recovered, and was about to level with the surrounding ground. The underground energy veins had also returned to their original path, and the magma that surged and surged under the ground had gradually solidified, forming a new rock stratum. With great difficulty, Patriarch Muji and Arhat Rath, whose overall strength had dropped to the same level as a nascent soul cultivator, crawled out from the ground. They looked at each other with tears in their eyes, yet neither of them could shed any tears. Both men's skin and flesh were completely corroded by the shape-shifting Yin water, leaving behind only 2 skeletons. Patriarch Muji's skeleton was pitch black, while Arhat Rath's was pure silver with a hint of pale golden color. "You meow." Patriarch Muji snorted coldly. "You meow." Arhat Rath threw his head back and roared furiously. After that, a thunderbolt suddenly exploded on the back of Arhat Rath's head, causing him to stagger and stumble a dozen steps forward in a sorry state. Luckily, he did not fall to the ground. Before Arhat Rath could come to his senses, another several dozens of thunderbolts came smashing down at him, making him howl furiously. But how could he have the strength to struggle? Not only the thunderbolts, a dozen pinkish sword beams were hacking and slashing at him in a messy manner, causing sparks and sparks to fly all over Arhat-Rath's body. Yet, none of them could leave even a scratch on him. However, the sword beams came with a very strong force, causing Arhat-Rath's skeleton to sway and sway in all directions. All of a sudden, he fell to the ground, rolling and rolling on the ground as the sword beams struck him, and could no longer stand on his feet. Patriarch Muji was taken aback, and hastily took a big step back. He and Arhat-Rath were severely wounded at the moment, without any strength left in their bodies. Their skin and flesh were corroded by the shape-shifting yin water, and they were at their weakest. How could Patriarch Muji not panic when a nascent divinity cultivator could threaten their lives? The celestial fiend puppet, who had transformed into Reverend Sanlu, roared and roared as he brought Wu Qi, Lao Ai, and the rest of the people. Thunderbolts and sword beams crackled and rattled as they attacked Arhat-Rath. Patriarch, please help us kill this bald donkey. Reverend Sanlu roared at the top of his voice. 7 days ago, it was this disciple who got lucky and killed that bald donkey abbot of Golden Pavilion Temple. Patriarch Muji was struck with wild joy when he saw Reverend Sanlu bringing a few cultivators from Euphoria Heavenly Palace and some members of Min clan. Then, he cried out, "My grandchildren, you have done well. Jis Dao Patriarch Muji Heaven Earth Dao Sect Star Sect Ling King Tian." Laughing wildly, Patriarch Muji spread his pitch-black skeleton, curled his body and leaped towards Arhat-Rath. The finger bone stabbed forcefully into Arhat-Rath's skull, producing a large amount of sparks. Arhat-Rath, the willpower you've accumulated through 300 reincarnations is going to benefit me. Patriarch Muji cried out sternly. Arhat-Rath, the willpower you've accumulated through 300 reincarnations is going to benefit me. With your Buddhist energy essence, I'll be able to expel the fiends, and safely transcend the saint and fiend immortal tribulation in the future. Hehe, with the help of your Buddhist energy essence, this minor injury of mine will be nothing. Give it to me now. Arhat-Rath roared furiously. He struggled and tried to resist, but Wu Qi and his company had already rushed over, unleashing a flurry of attacks on him. At this moment, there was not even a tiny bit of Buddhist energy left in his body, and he did not even have the strength to control his prime Buddhist treasures. His fleshly body had turned into a skeleton once again, and the invincible golden body of the Buddhist League had turned into nothing. He had lost the last chance to save his own life. On top of that, Patriarch Muji, whose cultivation base was not any weaker than him, could only struggle for 15 minutes. Eventually, Patriarch Muji crushed his skull with a finger, then pulled out a fist-sized relic shimmering with a bright silver gleam, which Arhat-Rath had cultivated through 300 reincarnations. Wu Qi smashed the relic with a thunderbolt, destroying the last thread of Arhat-Rath's soul. Patriarch Muji opened his mouth greedily, and the relic transformed into a stream of light and rushed into his body, coating his skeleton with a thick layer of silver light. The Buddhist energy essence of a Buddhist cultivator was very beneficial to a cultivator from the Evil League. By devouring an eminent Buddhist monk, it could save a cultivator from several hundred years of laborious cultivation. After Patriarch Muji devoured Arhat-Rath's relic, it was tantamount to him having his cultivation base doubled out of nowhere. As long as he exercised the evil technique and gradually refined the enormous energy essence in the relic, he might be able to improve his cultivation base by a few tiers. On top of that, the Buddhist energy essence was an expert in repelling all kinds of fiends. With that, when Patriarch Muji was cultivating in the future, the most troublesome inner demons of fiend immortals would no longer be able to stop him. With that, he would be able to improve his realm and cultivation base at an incredible speed. The cultivation techniques of the Evil League were the fastest. As long as there were no inner demons, no immortal could improve his cultivation base faster than a fiend immortal. After devouring all the cultivation base of Arhat-Rath, who was also a 24th tier heaven immortal, Patriarch Muji did have a great chance to become a gold immortal in the future. Perhaps, he could transcend the heavenly tribulation and become a gold immortal, a saint and fiend immortal. The greedy Patriarch Muji simply smashed Arhat-Rath's skeleton and absorbed all the bone powder into his body. The fleshly body of a cultivator from the Buddhist League was a Dharma body that had been tempered countless times, and contained an enormous amount of energy essence. The amount of Buddhist energy essence in Arhat Rath's skeleton was roughly equal to 20% of what he had in his relic. It was a very frightening amount. The energy essence of Buddhist energy essence was boundless, and Patriarch Muji's evil technique was extremely magical. After devouring Arhat Rath's relic and golden skeleton, in just the time it took to finish a pot of tea, Patriarch Muji's body was covered with a thin layer of muscles. The scarlet muscles were wriggling, and there was not even a single piece of skin on them. They looked extremely horrifying. Patriarch Muji waved his arm complacently, staring at the puppet who had transformed into Reverend Sanlo. Laughing hideously, he said, you are from Euphoria Heavenly Palace? Obediently, the puppet dropped to his knees and answered respectfully, I'm Reverend Sanlo from Euphoria Heavenly Palace, the current city lord of Anhi City. As he spoke, the celestial fiend puppet burst into tears and said, Patriarch, please seek justice for me. Palace Master is dead, and all the elders have their souls perished. The foundation of Euphoria Heavenly Palace is no more, and I'm just a wandering ghost now. In the future, I'll definitely be bullied by others. Patriarch Muji patted on his chest and said, don't worry. From now on, you will be the master of Euphoria Heavenly Palace, and also my foster son. You will now take over the foundation of Euphoria Heavenly Palace, and everything in the palace will be under your control. Arhat Rath is dead, and from now on, the area around Anhi City will be your world. Just do whatever you want, and I will take care of you. Kill anyone who dares to disobey me. After devouring Arhat Rath's relic, Patriarch Muji's confidence skyrocketed. Casually, he reached his hand into the ground and grabbed the storage ring left behind by Arhat Rath, gripping it tightly in his palm. After a brief moment of pondering, Patriarch Muji nodded and said, the branch of Golden Pavilion Temple is extinct. Bring some men with you and search Golden Pavilion Temple. Everything you find will be yours. As he was in a hurry to return to his fiend palace to digest today's harvest, Patriarch Muji hurriedly gave him a few words of advice, then left quickly. Before leaving, he did not forget to give Reverend Sanlo a medallion carved with countless naked fiends, telling him to summon Patriarch Muji immediately if anyone dared to cause trouble in Anhi City. A dark cloud wrapped around Patriarch Muji. All of a sudden, he transformed into a beam of dark light and sped away, leaving behind his joyful laughter in the void. Although he did not obtain the energy essence left behind by the Ganoderma immortal, he had devoured Arhat Rath, and that was worth the trip. Seeing Patriarch Muji leave, Lao Ai tilted his head and cursed under his breath, that old fool. How could he take away that bald donkey's storage ring? Wu Qi breathed out a deep sigh, nodding his head somewhat angrily as he said, this is the greed of an orthodox fiend immortal. TSK, if not for the fact that we are not familiar with this place, and are looking for a backer to support us temporarily, I would have killed him as well. TSK, Arhat Rath's relic is useless to me now, but it is still very beneficial to you. After receiving the medallion from Reverend Sanlo, Wu Qi waved his hand and said, but, no matter what, we can occupy Anhi City with a peace of mind now. Wu Qi turned to look at Lao Ai and asked with a surprised tone, don't you think you still have a procedure to go through? Lao Ai looked at Wu Qi with even more surprise and asked, what do I lack? Wu Qi pointed at the sky and said, although your cultivation base has reached the required level, what about your thunder tribulation? Why don't you transcend it this morning? How long are you going to delay it? He gave the surroundings a glance. Apart from Madman Shui, there were only Min clan members transformed from his celestial fiend puppets. Then, he reached his hand into his forehead and pulled out 8 immortal items that glinted with a strange gleam, handing them over to Lao Ai and Madman Shui. Here are 8 immortal items. Make do with them. Quickly transcend your thunder tribulation, and we will have one more expert of heaven immortal realm. With that, controlling Anhi City will be a piece of cake. Looking at the 8 immortal items handed over by Wu Qi, Lao Ai, and Madman Shui's eyes turned green. Hastily, the pair of master and disciple stretched out their hands and grabbed all 8 immortal items. Lao Ai happily looked at the set of immortal clothes, an immortal sword, an immortal shield, and a handkerchief that could be used to capture an opponent in a large area. He nodded and said with a smile, "If you can always be this generous in the future, I'll make up my mind to follow you." Wu Qi did not say anything, thinking, as long as Lao Ai knows the severity of the situation. Those decent immortals might not even have a few immortal items, and yet, I've given you 8 of them in one go. Is there any peak stage nascent soul cultivator under the heaven who can give away a few immortal items like Wu Qi? He is definitely the only one under the heaven. With the help of immortal items, Lao Ai's transcendence of thunder tribulation was a smooth journey. There was nothing worth mentioning. The company returned to Anhui City. Immediately, Reverend Sanlu ordered his clan members to set up a table and chairs in front of the city lord mansion, and erected a tall flagpole. A long flag was hung on the flagpole, with a row of large characters written on it in ink. Euphoria Heavenly Palace is recruiting heroes under the heaven with great hospitality. On the walls on both sides of the main entrance of the City Lord Mansion, 2 large notices were pasted, listing the conditions and benefits of the City Lord Mansion's recruitment: Jean Dan Human Immortal, monthly salary of 10 lower-grade energy stones, a certain number of spirit pills and spirit talismans. Nascent Soul Earth Immortal, monthly salary of 100 lower-grade energy stones, a certain number of spirit pills and spirit talismans, and a certain number of gold and silver. Nascent Divinity Half Immortal, monthly salary of 100 middle-grade energy stones, a certain number of spirit pills and spirit talismans, a certain number of gold and silver, fine wine and delicacies, and even a luxurious mansion with beautiful wives. Heaven Immortal. Euphoria Heavenly Palace is a small place, so we dare not recruit heaven immortals for the time being. A dead silence reigned in Anhui City when the notice was posted. Chapter 440. The sun was shining brightly. Wu Qi was sitting behind a long table in front of the City Lord Mansion, sipping a cup of fragrant tea in a leisurely manner. Placed before him were 8 small celadone plates, on which were placed 8 exquisite pastries. They were the finest pastries meticulously prepared by the chefs in the City Lord Mansion. The tea was a fine spirit tea picked from the deep mountain next to Anhui City, and the pastries were of the finest quality. Beside him were 2 pretty and obedient serving girls, fanning Wu Qi. As the cool breeze mixed with the aroma of the pastries blew gently into his nose, even Wu Qi felt that the enjoyment he was enjoying was a little depraved. The banners above his head were flapping noisily in the strong wind. Some idlers were standing carefully under the eaves across the road, looking at the commotion in this direction. From time to time, a few people dressed as itinerant cultivators would walk past the City Lord Mansion, carefully and quickly stealing a few glances at the notices pasted on both sides of the main entrance. Wu Qi noticed that some itinerant cultivators were obviously tempted, but when they were about to walk towards him, they were dragged away by their companions. Smacking his lips, Wu Qi turned and asked one of the serving girls, "It's been 2 days. Why hasn't anyone applied for the recruitment yet?" The 2 serving girls dared not say a word. Instead, they just bowed respectfully and answered in a low voice, "We have no idea." No idea. Wu Qi gulped down the tea, then grabbed 2 pieces of pine nut cake and swallowed them. After that, he clapped his hands and called out to the City Lord Mansion, "Monk, come out and keep an eye on this place. If anyone applies for the recruitment, bring him to Reverend Sanlu. I don't believe that no one is willing to apply for the recruitment with such a good offer." He rose to his feet, and as he was about to go to Anhui City to gather some information, he suddenly saw an old man clad in a long green robe hiding behind the curtain of a pill shop diagonally across the street, peering at Wu Qi through the gap between the curtain and the door with his eyes narrowed. The old man's cultivation base was merely at the early stage Jean Dan realm, and his eyes were filled with vigilance, and even a little bit of disgust. The old man was hiding behind the curtain, and half of his face was covered by the shadow of the door. If it weren't for Wu Qi's sharp eyes, how could he have found him? With a frown, Wu Qi stood up and gave his seat to the little monk, guarding Heart, who had just walked out of the mansion. Then, He walked towards the elixir room with a smile. Seeing that Wu Qi was walking towards him, the old man's expression immediately changed. He casually slammed the door and was about to close it. However, how could Wu Qi allow him to close the door? He moved his feet and went to the door. He put his hand on the door and greeted the old man through the curtain. "Fellow Taoist, why do you look like you have seen a ghost when you see me?" He, could it be that fellow Taoist has misunderstood me? The old man's face turned blue. In a panic, he let go of the door and staggered a few steps back, cupping his fist and saying to Wu Qi with a dry voice, "Fellow Taoist, senior, I wonder how I have offended you." Ha, ha. Even as he spoke, the old man shivered, and his teeth chattered noisily. Obviously, he was frightened by Wu Qi's sudden visit. Noises could be heard coming from all directions. Wu Qi did not need to release his divine sense. Just by looking down at the celestial fiend puppet while standing on a cloud high up in the sky, it was enough for him to know what was going on in the surroundings. The managers and workers of the dozens of nearby shops that were related to cultivators had carefully walked out of their rooms, coming up with various excuses to greet each other. But, all of them had their eyes fixed on Wu Qi. Looking back at those people in astonishment, those shopkeepers and waiters immediately scattered like birds and beasts. One by one, they hurriedly returned to their own shops. There were even a few timid ones who directly closed their doors and hung up a sign saying that they were closed. Wu Qi raised his head and looked at the sky blankly. It was noon, and the sun was shining brightly in the sky. "Closed? Are you trying to show the ghost that you are closing?" Laughing dryly, Wu Qi walked into the pill shop, cupped his fist and said to the old man with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, don't panic and don't be afraid. I don't have any evil intentions. I just have something I need to consult with you." With trembling hands, the old man picked up a piece of cloth and wiped a clean shelf beside him. Laughing dryly, he said, "What questions do you have, senior? I'll definitely tell you everything I know. You can just ask me anything you want." Wu Qi rolled his eyes and asked with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, which sect are you from?" With a thud, the old man dropped to his knees, kowtowed heavily and said, "Have mercy on me, senior. Please have mercy on me. I come from a small sect, and 9 days ago, one of my seniors died tragically in the mountains. Now, there are no seniors in the sect who can take charge. Sob, if senior has taken a fancy to my little foundation, you can just take it. It was not easy for me to cultivate arduously for 300 years to form the Jin Dan. Please spare my life, senior." Stunned, Wu Qi stared blankly at the old man, whose face was stained with tears and snot. It took him a long while before he came back to his senses and said, "Am I really that scary?" The old man continued to kowtow heavily and sob, "Senior Arhat Rath from the land of phaseless Buddhism has undergone nirvana. Golden Pavilion Temple was destroyed, and Jade Pagoda Temple was overturned. It was not easy for me to cultivate my cultivation base, and it took me 300 years to form the Jin Dan. Senior, please have mercy on me. I can't just throw away this little bit of pure yang I have." Wu Qi was at a loss once again. He frowned and pondered for a long while, then finally pulled the old man up and snapped, "Don't cry. Tell me what happened. If you dare to cry again, I'll peel off your skin, pull out your tendons, and banish your soul to the 9 nether hell, where you will suffer the pain of death flame day and night." The loud roar was followed by more door-slamming noises. However, the old man quickly stopped crying, wiped his face with a piece of cloth, and forced a smile onto his face. In a low voice, he bent his waist and carefully explained the strange atmosphere in Anhe City to Wu Qi. It turned out that when Jing'an was the city lord, the power balance in the regions around Anhe City was relatively balanced. Euphoria Heavenly Palace and Jade Pagoda Temple were locked in a stalemate. These two powers, who had powerful backers behind them, fought openly and covertly, and reached a balance. Naturally, the other small powers were happy to seek development in the gap. When Jing'an became the city lord and governed Anhui city with the mind of a Buddhist cultivator, these small powers lived a much better life. However, in less than half a month, the situation had changed drastically. Euphoria Heavenly Palace had raised Jade Pagoda Temple and sent their army to Golden Pavilion Temple. Jing'an was killed, and Reverend Sanlu was replaced as the city lord. Although Reverend Sanlu was an evil cultivator, as long as Golden Pavilion Temple remained standing, the two powers would still be evenly matched. At most, Reverend Sanlu would be greedy and ask for a bigger share, but the other small powers would still be able to live a peaceful life in Anhui city. However, Lu Yi and the others suddenly intervened, and Wu Qi even gave him a heavy push on his back. Euphoria Heavenly Palace and Golden Pavilion Temple were completely wiped out, and all the sect leaders and elders of the various powers around Anhui city were turned into ashes by Wu Qi. Even the leader of the Righteous League, Arhat Wrath, was devoured by Patriarch Muji, and even his ashes were refined by Patriarch Muji. For the time being, Euphoria Heavenly Palace was the strongest power around Anhui city, and Patriarch Muji was like a dark cloud that weighed heavily on the hearts of all the disciples from the smaller powers. Euphoria Heavenly Palace had a notorious reputation, as they had always been involved in some shady business of robbing men and seducing women. As a result, their reputation in Anhui city was so bad that it could even reach 800 miles away. Now that Arhat Wrath was dead, Euphoria Heavenly Palace had lost its nemesis, and all the backers of the smaller powers were killed as well. Therefore, it was impossible for the disciples of these smaller powers to not be frightened. Take the old man standing before Wu Qi as an example. The strongest Grand Elder in his sect only possessed a cultivation base of mid-stage nascent divinity realm. But, out of curiosity, he went deep into the mountains in the east, wanting to see what the remains of a Ganoderma immortal looked like. Of course, at the same time, he was thinking of taking advantage of the situation. In the end, he never returned, and even a few nascent soul sect elders were turned into ashes. Now, there were only a few weak cultivators of Jin Dan realm left in the sect, while Wu Qi and his company were supported by Patriarch Muji. Among these disciples from smaller powers, one could not bear to abandon the foundation of their sect, while the other was extremely afraid of Wu Qi and his company. Therefore, for the past few days, they were like ants on a hot pan. Their minds were tormented, but they did not know what to do. Although Wu Qi and his company had set up a banner to recruit itinerant cultivators to join the City Lord Mansion, the problem was that Euphoria Heavenly Palace had a very bad reputation. Which itinerant cultivator would dare to join just for the high salary? Cultivators valued their own cultivation base and energy essence the most, but Lady Qiao loved to plunder the yang energy of her own disciples. Although it was said that she had fallen, but with Euphoria Heavenly Palace's bad reputation, who would dare to join them? I see. Wu Qi looked helplessly at the old man, whose legs were trembling with fear, and asked, "Is Euphoria Heavenly Palace really that bad?" The old man laughed dryly, daring not to answer Wu Qi's question. Not only did Euphoria Heavenly Palace have a bad reputation, it was so bad that the whole street was filled with it. Each and every disciple of Euphoria Heavenly Palace was a fiend. Which cultivator dared to offend them? Even if Wu Qi were to place a real gold and silver in front of them, none of the itinerant cultivators would dare to join the City Lord Mansion just for the sake of money, let alone merely setting up a banner to recruit people. A flame of anger rose in Wu Qi's heart as he stared at the old man's dry laugh. How could he have overlooked this problem? Was Euphoria Heavenly Palace really that bad? However, now that all the seniors from the various powers around Anhui city were dead, why would he bother to reason with these cultivators who stayed in the city? With a cold snort, Wu Qi patted on the old man's shoulder, spun and walked out of the pill room. Unhurriedly, he came to the front door of the City Lord Mansion, pulled down the 2 notices hanging on the door, and flew up into the sky. Mustering his innate energy, Wu Qi cried out sternly, "All itinerant cultivators in Anhui city, listen up. From today onwards, all of you are the outer sect disciples of Euphoria Heavenly Palace. There will be no monthly salary, and the only way out for you is to bow your head and obey my orders obediently." Casually, he threw a few thunderbolts out and destroyed a few buildings in the city. From today onwards, all the shops in the city will be the property of Euphoria Heavenly Palace. All the shopkeepers and workers, as well as those whose cultivation base is above the peak stage Hotian realm, get the hell out of here and register in the City Lord Mansion right now. From today onwards, all of you are the outer sect disciples of Euphoria Heavenly Palace. Whoever dares to refuse, I'll kill him. Whoever dares to conceal the accounts, I'll kill him. Whoever dares to hide his wealth, I'll kill him. While throwing several dozens of thunderbolts in all directions, Wu Qi howled at the top of his voice. In short, from today onwards, Euphoria Heavenly Palace will unify in He City. Those who submit to us will prosper, and those who oppose us will perish. All cultivators, make a register of all the assets of your sect and submit them to me today. Those who disobey will be killed. Panting, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, I'll guarantee the safety of all the outer sect disciples who join Euphoria Heavenly Palace today. Those who join us after today, will inevitably be turned into cultivation vessels. Suddenly, a great commotion broke out in the city, as large groups of cultivators ran out from all directions, either riding on clouds or riding on flying swords, as they raced towards the City Lord Mansion with all their might. In just the time it took to finish a pot of tea, the City Lord Mansion was completely surrounded by several tens of thousands of cultivators. Each and every one of them was screaming and yelling at the top of their lungs, crying and begging Reverend Sanlo to quickly recruit them. Wu Qi was delighted by the scene, and suddenly he burst out laughing. Chapter 441. Out of habit, Wu Qi became a hands-off shopkeeper, and for the past few days, all he could think of was to enter a secluded cultivation and heal his wounds. After being nourished by the blind old man's spirit tea, 90% of the aura of death in his body had been healed. Through Wu Qi's own efforts, 1 month later, all the aura of death in Wu Qi's body was gone, and his wounds were fully healed. The aura of death transformed by his innate nascent soul had helped Wu Qi's dragon transformation step into the realm of 35 transformations, and the overall strength of his fleshly body had been improved by a few times. However, all the cultivators with slightly higher cultivation base in the vicinity of Anhe City had been wiped out by Wu Qi. Among those who had joined Reverend San Li's sect, the 3 nascent soul cultivators could be considered as the best, the over 50 Jin Dan cultivators could be considered as the outstanding ones, and the rest of them were Xiantian cultivators. They could barely control a flying sword and fly several tens of miles from the ground, and they could be considered as cultivators. Green Pill Sect, your former sect. Wu Qi turned and gave Eugene a look. Wu Qi did not care where he was, but just stared with his eyes wide and cried out fiercely, Green City. Heaven-breaking sword sect's sword of fire, the sword of 5 elements, was unleashed. Together with a towering flame, a crimson sword shadow plunged whistling down, enveloping the entire green forest mountain. A loud boom rang out as the flame towered 100,000 feet into the sky. 2 cliffs in front of them were shattered to pieces, and the raging flame spread in all directions, engulfing all the nearby woods and woods. Grabbing Eugene, Wu Qi transformed into a beam of dark light and shot up into the sky. Following Eugene's direction, he quickly flew towards a lofty mountain 10,000 miles to the west. The mountain was where Eugene's former sect, the Green Pill Sect, was located. The Green Pill Sect was quite famous in the area around Anhe City for their skill in concocting spirit pills. It was by harvesting the medicinal herbs they grew themselves and concocting spirit pills for sale that they managed to establish a small base in Anhe City. Holding his head up proudly, the middle-aged Taoist cried out coldly, "What a reckless fool! I'm Yun Zun of Green City, and I've been ordered to build a mansion here. Since you dare to come and make trouble, you can stay here forever. Benefactor, are you being robbed of your money or your body? Why aren't you wearing anything on your body? How strange. You're a man. Could it be that you've been raped?" After a brief pause, Taoist Yun Zong cried out with a somewhat fanatical voice, "My master is Reverend Li Yang, the grandson of the ancestral master of Green City. We are just ants." The ants were like immortal cultivators, and the spring water in all directions was the vast and immeasurable great Tao of heaven and earth. a single misstep could mean death. The great Tao of heaven and earth was vast and boundless, and no one knew where the end was. Wu Qi, who was standing on the shore, looked at the spring that was only a few dozen feet in radius. Naturally, he could see through the truth of the spring at a glance, but how could the ant, who was in the middle of the situation, see through it? How could he see through it? Wu Qi patted on Eugene's shoulder, smiled and said, "Now, you and I are both members of Euphoria Heavenly Palace. Hidden Heart and Guarded Heart are also my saviors. Although they didn't really save me, I still owe them this favor." Taoist Yun Zong said proudly, "I am Green City of Xianyang." While smiling, Wu Qi's eyes suddenly went wide. A supreme sword energy shot up to nearly 10,000 feet high from the top of his head, transforming into a huge red sword shadow and slashing down viciously. "Those who are alive in there, come out and face your death. Your master Taoist is here to wipe out your entire clan. How can you call yourselves cultivators?" Shaking his head, Wu Qi breathed out a long sigh. Just as Wu Qi flew for less than 100 miles, 12 dark beams caught up with him at top speed. Their faces were brimming with killing intent as they let out low cries and followed closely behind Wu Qi. Wu Qi's heart was filled with killing intent at the moment, as his state of mind had affected the emotions of these celestial fiend puppets. As they got closer and closer to Greenwood Mountain, the killing intent emanating from them grew stronger and stronger. Gradually, it turned into a large sheet of dark smoke and coiled around their bodies. Apart from that, the mines near Anhe City needed people to mine, the herb fields needed people to take care of them, and all other industries needed people to manage. It was unrealistic to expect these people to contribute much combat strength to Wu Qi, but they were more than enough to help Wu Qi with all sorts of chores. Taoist Yun Zong waved his hand casually. The wind and clouds around Wu Qi changed, and he suddenly found himself trapped in an illusion. Reverend Li Yang. He was Reverend Li Yang from Green City. As for the other several tens of thousands of people, Wu Qi could only stand in the courtyard of the city lord mansion with his hands clasped behind his back. How can you call yourself a cultivator with over 30,000 Hotian cultivators here? How can you call yourself a cultivator after spending so many years on a place like Panggu Continent, a place with abundant natural energy? While Wu Qi's mind was wandering in all directions, pondering over these mysterious questions, the front door of the courtyard was suddenly pushed open by someone. Eugene, an old man of early-stage Jin Dan realm whom Wu Qi met a few days ago, ran into the courtyard with a panicked expression. "Senior, bad news. Two grandmasters have been killed." Suddenly, the wind stopped blowing in the backyard of the city lord mansion, and the trees stopped swaying. Everything seemed to have frozen. Accompanied by a strange sizzling noise, tiny wisps of sword energy shot out from Wu Qi's body. Apart from Eugene, all the flowers, trees, courtyards, and pavilions in the backyard were turned into fine dust at the same time. The suffocating pressure made Eugene stand stiffly before Wu Qi, not daring to make even the slightest movement. He suddenly had a feeling that with just a glance from Wu Qi, he would be turned into a wisp of smoke. On the left side of the green cliff wall, a row of large characters painted with human blood could be seen. They were very eye-catching. "Forbidden land, trespassers will be killed. This is a good item. It can calm the mind and suppress the flame of heart. What a good item." Fiddling with the bracelet, Wu Qi laughed out loud. Wu Qi's heart gave a jerk. He focused all his divine will on the tiny ant, and with a sudden change of mind, the poor ant vanished into thin air under the pressure of his divine will. With a gloomy face, Wu Qi turned around and shouted at Eugene, "Don't panic." "What happened?" Raising his head, Wu Qi stared at the drifting clouds in the sky, and suddenly, he was lost in thought. Could it be that in the eyes of some existences, the vast heavenly Tao was just a tiny spring, and Wu Qi and all the other immortal cultivators were like ants on a flower petal, struggling and fighting with each other? Wu Qi stared at the red ant in a trance, and suddenly, he laughed happily. Wu Qi had never paid much attention to these chores, but never in his wildest dreams did he expect that Lao Ai was actually an expert in management. Under Lao AI's management, these several tens of thousands of itinerant cultivators were assigned to various posts in Anhui city according to their specialties. In just 3 to 5 days, the operation of Anhui city was back to normal. Specialty products from all over the city were gathered in the city, and then transported to other places through the newly formed caravans with the signboard of Euphoria Heavenly Palace. A huge profit was about to be earned. How dare you! A light shout came from Greenwood Mountain. With a sweep of a green ray, the flame that blotted the sky was swept away. Nevertheless, these itinerant cultivators were still of some use. At least, the city was managed by someone, the city defenses were taken care of, the gutters were dredged, and the latrines were cleaned. Wu Qi was not in the mood to cultivate these itinerant cultivators, so he simply organized them into a team of city management and let them do whatever they wanted. With his body stiff, Eugene nodded and said, "Yes, this is where my master used to be." But now. Trembling, Eugene came before Wu Qi and stammered, "Little brother, I was ordered to bring Master's hidden heart and guarding heart to the base of Green Pill sect to collect some herbs. But someone suddenly broke in, claiming that they were going to seize the base of Green Pill sect and build an immortal's cave. I advised the 2 masters not to fight with them, but when the 2 masters hesitated, they were killed by a sword." Green City. Xianyang Green City. A middle-aged Taoist, clad in a white Taoist robe, with a sage-like appearance, walked out slowly with steady steps. Smiling, Wu Qi picked up the relics and pointed his finger at them. A ray of light flew out and fused them together, transforming into 18 silver pearls the size of egg yolks. Then, he took out a thread of natural silk, carefully strung the 18 pearls into a bracelet and put it on his wrist. A series of dripping noises was heard, as 108 thumb-sized, pearl-like fleshly body relics fell to the ground from Hidden Heart's body. There were also some relics left in Guarding Heart's body, but there were only 12 of them, and they were only the size of a broad bean. "Whoever kills you, Wu Qi, will definitely pay them back 100 times. Wu Qi pressed his palm on Hidden Heart's corpse. A ball of purple and green flame burst out, turning him into a wisp of green smoke and dissipating in the air. After that, he unleashed another stream of divine flame of order, burning Guarding Heart's corpse into ashes as well. Standing quietly in the backyard of the City Lord Mansion, Wu Qi had a spring in front of him. A few leaves and petals were spinning on the crystal-clear surface of the spring. On one of the petals, a red ant was crawling around in panic. But, no matter where he went, he would bump into the water after a few steps. The ant was spinning around in panic, not knowing how to escape. But now, all the elders of the Azure Pill sect had been annihilated, and the remaining members of the Azure Pill sect, including Eugene, had joined the Euphoria Heavenly Palace. Thus, the Azure Forest Mountain where the Azure Pill sect was located had become the territory of the Euphoria Heavenly Palace. However, as the current Euphoria Heavenly Palace under Wu Qi's control did not have enough manpower to station here, Greenwood Mountain had become an empty mountain. Suddenly, the little monk's somewhat naive and cunning voice rang out in Wu Qi's ears. Not long ago, the little monk had bumped into Wu Qi, who was severely wounded, and brought him back to Temple of Hidden Heart out of kindness. This pair of master and disciple were very affectionate and loyal, and they were a very good couple. Holding Eugene in his hand, Wu Qi landed on the ground and walked slowly before Hidden Heart. He lifted up the old monk's drooping head and gave him a closer look. There was a large hole on the old monk's forehead. Obviously, the relic was either taken away by someone, destroyed, or had broken through the void and fled. But no matter what was left here was just a dead body. There was no need to look at the little monk, Guarding Heart. Even Hidden Heart, who had stepped into the realm of Arhat, was in such a situation. How could he be any better? In just one day, all the cultivators in Anhui city had become Reverend Sanli's disciples and grand disciples, and in other words, Wu Qi's disciples and grand disciples. Wu Qi scanned these itinerant cultivators with his divine will, who only had about 30 to 50 years of cultivation base. He wished he could slap them all to death with just one slap. What was the use of having these guys as his subordinates? Even those seafood subordinates of Lord Xiansheng were much stronger than them. At the very least, if they were in the ocean, a single great white shark could easily kill 300 to 500 of these itinerant cultivators. All of a sudden, Wu Qi came to a halt. Right at the entrance of Greenwood Mountain, between two towering green cliffs that towered into the clouds, two wooden stakes were erected in front of the memorial archway, which was originally carved with the words Green Dan Sect. The bloody corpses of Hidden Heart and Guarding Heart were stripped naked and hung on the stakes as a warning to the public. Chapter 442. There were countless illusions in front of him, including cities, mountains, rivers, humans, beasts, birds, fishes, flowers, trees, and all kinds of strange things. There were also mountains of gold and seas of silver, and beautiful women who could topple a nation dancing on the ocean of blood. With just a thought, his soul would be dragged out of his body by this boundless environment, and naturally, there would be heavenly thunders and earthly flames that would smash and shatter his soul. With just a casual wave of his hand, Daoist Yun Zong could produce such illusions that could directly attack one's soul. It showed that his magical power and divine ability had reached a certain realm. When those immortals who were used to using flying swords and talismans were caught by Daoist Yun Zong, they would be subdued by him unknowingly, and with a slight carelessness, their souls would perish. The legacy of Dao in Green City was indeed extraordinary, a few levels higher than the abilities of ordinary immortals. Exercising the mystic eyes of universe, Wu Qi glanced at the illusions around him and nodded his head in admiration. His mystic eyes of universe could now peer several hundred miles deep into the ground. In his eyes, all rocks and sand were like clear water. However, no matter how hard he exercised his divine ability and magical power to look at this thin layer of illusions, all he could see were clouds and smoke lingering around him, making him look both real and unreal at the same time. He could not see anything. What a good technique, a good divine ability, and a good magical power. Wu Qi praised inwardly. Suddenly, he raised both hands up and cried out, "Are you the senior immortal from Green City of Xianyang Heavenly Realm? This is a misunderstanding. I'm the new chief supervisor of Euphoria Heavenly Palace's outer sect. This is all a misunderstanding." Daoist Yun Zong snorted coldly. With a casual point of his finger, he strengthened the illusions around Wu Qi, then said mockingly in a low voice, "Since you could destroy my base just because of a misunderstanding, then if it was not a misunderstanding, wouldn't you have already brought your men to kill me? With your mere peak-stage nascent soul cultivation base, and the few puny Gene Dan cultivators around you, how dare you ask me to die?" Wu Qi let out a few panicked roars, then snapped, "Of course it is a misunderstanding. Since Master Immortal wants to build a Daoist Rite temple around Anhe City, Euphoria Heavenly Palace can manage it. Wouldn't it be much more convenient for the Immortal Master to do all the work by himself? Since Master Immortal has opened up a Dao Rite ground, you will definitely need to recruit disciples. Junior can help Master Immortal find several hundred disciples with spiritual roots to take as disciples." The transformation of the illusion came to an abrupt stop. Then, clouds and smoke drifted away, and all the illusions shattered inch by inch, revealing Daoist Yun Zong, who had his head held high and his nostrils pointed at Wu Qi. "You have such intentions. I'm very happy. Since that's the case, follow me in. Let's talk about how you're going to help me build this Dao venue. I'll say the ugly words first. If you lie to me, I can't be bothered to say what will happen to you." With a flick of his sleeve, a plume of green smoke rushed out from Daoist Yun Zhang's side, wrapping around Wu Qi and his company as they flew into the depths of Greenwood Mountain. Originally, the most important place of the Green Pills sect was a few rows of small wooden and bamboo houses, scattered in a picturesque manner in a valley inside the Green Forest Mountain. As Daoist Yun Zong had just arrived, although he had chosen Greenwood Mountain as his Dao Rite ground, he did not have the time to renovate the place. As a result, the place still looked the same as when Green Pills sect was built. 8 young Taoists were seen holding various formation discs and flags in their hands, deploying defensive mechanisms around the valley. Originally, the defensive formation of Green Pills sect was ridiculously weak, and obviously, Taoist Yunzong did not think highly of it. Apart from these 8 disciples, there were also 4 Taoist children, 2 boys and 2 girls, who looked to be around 12 to 13 years old. They were all the men Taoist Yunzong had brought to Greenwood Mountain. For Taoist Yunzong, who had the cultivation base of a 27th tier heaven immortal, 8 disciples and 4 Taoist children were a little shabby. On top of that, when Wuqi walked past the 8 disciples, he gave them a quick glance. The formation discs and flags used by Taoist Yunzong were not of good quality, as they were mainly forged from 100-year-old dark iron. Among all formation discs and flags, they were considered as the lowest grade. Although the grade of the formation was not low, the materials used to construct the formation were too poor. As a result, the power of the formation could only stop heaven immortals below the 34th tier. They were the poor, unlucky fellows who were sent by Green City to Pangu continent to open up their own territory. After a few days of investigation, Wuqi had learned that being sent to Pangu continent to establish a Taoist Rite temple was not an honorable task. If the Taoist Rite temple was established in a place where no immortal sects had a foothold, the official power of Yu dynasty, who served the human emperor, would stop them from doing so. If it were a place like Anhui City, where the immortal sects had already divided their territories and established their footholds, the competition would be particularly fierce. If not for the incident with Lu Yi, and Wuqi's interference by plotting against Patriarch Muji and Arhat Wrath, causing one of the leaders of the righteous and evil sects to die, and the other to enter a secluded cultivation, Taoist Yunzong would have to bear the brunt of the joint suppression from both men if he dared to establish a Taoist Rite temple in Anhui City. Patriarch Muji represented the clan of Fiend Immortals, while Arhat Wrath was a disciple of the Buddhist League, and Green City was a figure of the Orthodox Taoist League. Originally, Anhui City was in a situation where the righteous and evil sects were evenly divided. If the righteous Taoist League wanted to take a slice of the pie, it would be strange if Taoist Yunzong did not have his head riddled with bumps. However, the situation had changed. Taoist Yunzong had appeared at the right place at the right time. Wuqi did not believe it was a coincidence. Perhaps, this fellow was instructed by some influential figures in Green City, and came to Anhui City to test the waters. If Taoist Yunzong could establish a foothold in Anhui City smoothly, the powers of Green City might invade the city on a large scale. But, if Taoist Yunzong suffered a head-on defeat here, Green City would immediately pull back their hands, cease all activities, and lay low. That was why Taoist Yunzong was so merciless, killing Hidden Heart and Guarding Heart with his sword right after he appeared. At the thought of the bloody corpses of Hidden Heart and Guarding Heart, Wuqi felt a twitching pain in his heart. But, he could not attack Taoist Yunzong now. Firstly, Taoist Yunzong's cultivation base was too strong, and Wuqi did not have the overall strength to do anything to him. Secondly, if he really did something to Taoist Yunzong, how was he going to summon the person behind him? Coincidentally, his master was Reverend Li Yang from Green City. He was the man who had schemed against Lady Dark Goldwater and trapped her on Shui Yuan planet for several hundreds of thousands of years. Therefore, Wuqi had to find a way to deal with Reverend Li Yang, and find a way to trick him. With his head held high, Taoist Yunzong brought Wuqi and the others to a great banyan tree that stood 1,000 feet tall, with a canopy that stretched for several miles. This big banyan tree already had its own climate. Looking at its shape and appearance, it was at least hundreds of thousands of years old. According to common sense, a tree like this should have formed its demon essence crystal core, and as long as it could survive the heavenly fire and thunder tribulation, it would be able to transform into a human and become a demon immortal. However, right in the middle of the main trunk of this great banyan tree, 7 demon-suppressing nails forged from purple gold were hammered deep into the trunk, completely wiping out the possibility of the tree transforming into a demon. On the caps of these nails, a vermilion seal was clearly branded. A certain great oracle of Dayu's Directorate of Celestials had killed this tree on a certain day in a certain month in a certain year. It was an official act of Yu dynasty, as the great oracle of Yu dynasty had personally suppressed the banyan tree and wiped out its innate spirituality. From then on, this great tree could only be a tree, and could no longer cultivate into a demon spirit. This was also one of the main duties of Yu Dynasty's Directorate of Celestials, which was to completely wipe out all the roots that could cultivate into demon immortals, ghost immortals, and fiend immortals in Yu Dynasty, nipping them in the bud. Right under the main trunk of the great tree was a round table made from the roots of the old banyan tree, and a few round stools were placed on both sides of the table using the aerial roots of the old banyan tree. Taoist Yun Zong sat down on one of the stools casually, then pointed at the one next to him and said coolly, "Forget it. I still don't know your Taoist name, little friend." Wu Qi gave the cautious Eugene a look, then cupped his fist and bowed to Taoist Yun Zong with a smile on his face, then sat down on the stool respectfully. Licking his lips, Wu Qi chuckled and said, "I call myself Greed, and I'm now the chief supervisor of the outer sect under Reverend San Lu of Euphoria Heavenly Palace, in charge of all the outer sect affairs. I was rude today, as I didn't know that Green City's immortal master is going to open up a Taoist Rite temple here. That's why I came here recklessly. Please forgive me, immortal master." Taoist Yun Zong snorted coldly as he gave Wu Qi an appraising glance, then waved his hand arrogantly and said, "Ignorance is not a crime." It seems I was too impatient. Who are those two little monks to you?" Wu Qi was so furious that he struck out with his sword and destroyed the main entrance of Greenwood Mountain. Naturally, Taoist Yun Zong had witnessed the commotion, and that was why he asked the question. Wu Qi laughed dryly and said, "They are the two sinecures who have sought refuge in Euphoria Heavenly Palace. As you know, the overall strength of Euphoria Heavenly Palace has been greatly weakened. That monk Hidden Heart is a heaven immortal after all, just that his dermic power and cultivation base are slightly weaker. Initially, we were hoping that he could bring us more benefits." Before Taoist Yun Zong could say anything, Wu Qi flattered him and said respectfully, "But, with Senior guarding Greenwood Mountain, with a great immortal like you as our backer, that monk Hidden Heart is dead, isn't it? He is just a dead bald donkey. Hee, it's not a big deal. Instead, Euphoria Heavenly Palace will have to rely on Senior in the future. Senior, you don't have to be so courteous with us. If there's anything we can do for you, just let us know." For little Taoists, 2 men and 2 women came walking quickly over and served tea to Taoist Yun Zong and Wu Qi. However, Taoist Yun Zhang's disciples were indeed snobbish. The teacup Taoist Yun Zong used was a fine, sky-green porcelain teacup with a pale blue hue, while the one placed in front of Wu Qi was a fist-sized, black pottery utensil. After serving tea to Taoist Yun Zong, 4 little Taoists stood on the left and right side of Taoist Yun Zong, tilting their heads up and pointing their 8 nostrils at Wu Qi. Taoist Yun Zong did not offer them the tea, but simply picked up the teacup and took a sip from it, then said coolly, "That means Euphoria Heavenly Palace is backed by Patriarch Muji as well. That old fiend's cultivation base is just so, but his ancestral master is a very famous figure." Wu Qi smiled. He bowed slightly, looked at Taoist Yun Zong, and said, "Isn't the person behind Patriarch Muji Ji Patriarch Xian Yi from the Dark Palace in Huiming Heavenly Realm? Green City doesn't care about the Dark Palace at all. Frankly speaking, I'm not from Euphoria Heavenly Palace. Hee, what does that Dark Palace have to do with me?" Taoist Yun Zong clapped his hands, then looked at Wu Qi and praised, "Excellent. Little friend, it is the right thing to think in this way. Patriarch Xian Yi is merely a 16th-tier gold immortal, but my master, Reverend Li Yang, is a 7th-tier gold immortal." Wu Qi clapped his hands as well and said, "That's right. Now, I'll use all the resources I have to build a magnificent Taoist Rite temple for Senior, and recruit several hundred disciples with excellent aptitudes." Ha! Wu Qi threw his head back and laughed loudly. Taoist Yun Zong nodded his head and said with a smile, "I'll remember your contribution. When the right temple is opened, I can invite my master to come as well. If my master appreciates your contribution, he might even take you as his in-name disciple." Wu Qi and Taoist Yun Zong exchanged a glance, then burst into laughter at the same time. Chapter 443. A white cloud was flying leisurely towards Anhe City. On top of the cloud, Eugene stood carefully behind Wu Qi with his back hunched. He stared at Wu Qi for some time, and at last, he could no longer hold back the doubts in his mind. Lowering his voice, he asked, "Senior, are we just going to let this matter go?" Wu Qi was thinking about something with his eyes narrowed, something that happened a long time ago. There seemed to be a piece of black land flashing before his eyes, and a broad and warm hand was grabbing his hand, while a pale and powerless hand was rubbing his messy hair. When did that happen? That day, he was fighting something with all his might. Upon hearing Eugene's question, Wu Qi asked reflexively, What is it?" Eugene shivered, but he still plucked up his courage and asked, "Is it about Reverend Hidden Heart and Reverend Guarding Heart?" In the past few days, Eugene and Hidden Heart had formed a close friendship with each other. Eugene was born in Green Pill sect, a sect that devoted itself to concocting medicine. He also had a compassionate frame of mind like a doctor, which made him a perfect match for Hidden Heart and his disciple, who were fond of building pagodas. This time, it was Eugene who accompanied Hidden Heart and his disciple to Greenwood Mountain to gather medicinal herbs. Daoist Yunzong had killed both of them with a single sword strike, and it was impossible for Eugene to not have any thoughts about it. The more honest a man was, the more fearful he would be when he was stubborn. Eugene was usually very afraid of Wu Qi, but because of the matter between Hidden Heart and his disciple, he clenched his teeth and asked, "Reverend Hidden Heart and Reverend Guarding Heart are both good people. Are you going to let this matter go?" This time, Wu Qi heard Eugene's question clearly. With his hands clasped behind his back, he narrowed his eyes and stared at the looming Anhe city in front of him. Suddenly, he chuckled and said, "How can you calculate everything in the world? Eugene, have you ever heard of Green City?" Eugene opened his mouth, but did not say anything. He had never heard of Xianyang Qingcheng. The founding ancestral master of Green Pill sect had found an opportunity to cultivate immortality from some passing immortal, and was lucky enough to build such a foundation. The disciples of Green Pill sect had never left Panga continent, and they did not even know what was going on in outer heavenly realms. How could they know anything about Xianyang and Green City? Wu Qi sighed and said, "Green City of Xianyang is the strongest immortal sect in Xianyang heavenly realm. Its founding ancestral master inherited the legacy of an ancient immortal, and currently possesses the cultivation base of a third-tier gold immortal." Cold sweat immediately dripped from Eugene's forehead. Third-grade golden immortal. A golden immortal was already a legendary figure, let alone a third-tier golden immortal who was considered to be one of the top figures in the pyramid. Since Daoist Yunzong came from such a sect, what else could he say? Gloomily, Eugene bowed his head and breathed out a soundless sigh. It looked like there was no way to avenge Hidden Heart. However, what did Wu Qi's first sentence mean? How can the matters of the world be calculated clearly? So, was he going to calculate it or not? Eugene's expression flickered as he stared blankly at Wu Qi's back. Suddenly, Wu Qi turned and gave Eugene a look. After a brief moment of pondering, he fished out a small silk booklet from under his sleeve and threw it over to Eugene. "Study it carefully. There is a cultivation technique in it, which is much stronger than the one in Green Pill sect. If you cultivate this cultivation technique, you will be able to form your nascent soul in about 100 years. There are also some pill concocting techniques and some pill formulas for lower-grade spirit pills. If you can have some attainments in pill concoction, perhaps you will be able to form your nascent soul in less than 100 years. Over the years, Wu Qi had killed many people and plundered their belongings. He had killed many heaven immortals, and there were even more nascent soul and nascent divinity cultivators. Therefore, it was reasonable for him to choose some decent cultivation techniques from them. Eugene was a good man. Apart from being a little timid, his temperament suited Wu Qi's taste. Therefore, he gave Eugene a cultivation technique that was slightly above average, and the pill concocting technique was the basic pill concocting technique of White Cloud Immortal Sect. Although it was just a basic pill concocting technique, it was at least 10 times better than the pill concocting technique of Green Pill Sect, which had an unknown origin. Eugene took over the silk booklet and gave it a quick flip. Immediately, his eyes lit up. The energy concocting technique recorded in the silk booklet was extremely exquisite. It described a variety of techniques to gather energy into one's body, which was at least a few times more complicated than the ultimate technique of green pill sect. The pill formulas recorded at the back were even more exquisite, making Eugene feel as if his vision had been broadened. Although he had only skimmed through the silk booklet, he immediately felt his mind lighten up, as if there was an indescribable enlightenment flowing down from his head. His Jean Dan began to pound abruptly, and the natural energies around him began to flow into his body. Right at this moment, Wu Qi said in a low voice, "You should keep the heart-concealing and heart-guarding matters in your heart. Don't show it in front of Taoist Yunzong, or I might not be able to protect you. Don't meet him in the future. Just focus on your work in Anhe City, and you will be in charge of all the medicine shops under Euphoria Heavenly Palace." Yu Jin's mind raced. Could it be that Wu Qi was afraid that Taoist Yunzong would find out something by forbidding him from meeting Taoist Yunzong? His eyes turned warm, and he bowed and said, "You are right, senior. From now on, Eugene will stay in the city and not leave." Wu Qi answered softly, then began to count on his fingers. He could not enter Yuxiong Plain, as any immortal cultivator who entered would surely die. Even a primordial immortal had been killed, so Wu Qi dared not to try his luck. That being the case, there was no way he could go to the place mentioned in Scroll of Stealing that produced the innate yang energy in Yuxiong Plain. Now, there was only one option left for Wu Qi, and that was to find the trace of innate yang energy produced in the land of 7E Negate Yang, located at the bottom of the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean, according to the Scroll of Stealing. But, where was the Great Desolation Valley? How was he going to get there? Without the map, it was a tricky problem. In the map sold to Wu Qi by the blind old man, there was no mention of the Great Desolation Valley. Anhe City was just a small place on Pangu continent, and the cultivators here had never seen the outside world. Therefore, it was impossible for Wu Qi to get any information from them. Wu Qi felt a headache coming on. Perhaps, he could only place his hope on Reverend Li Yang. The white cloud drifted lightly and came to the sky above Anhe City. As Wu Qi was about to descend into the city lord mansion with his divine will, he suddenly discovered a commotion in a residence in the southeast corner of the city. A few women were running out of the residence in panic, and two of them had their hands stained with blood and filth. Meanwhile, a few men in the courtyard had drawn their blades and swords angrily, and were about to rush into the house. One of them was shouting, "Kill this monster! Our family is in trouble! Kill this monster! Monster!" Wu Qi scanned the house with his divine will, and a faint Buddhist light flashed across it immediately. On a large bed in the room, a pregnant woman, who had just given birth, was crying and curling up in a corner of the bed. In the middle of the bed, a baby, whose body was entirely red and whose umbilical cord was still intact, was sitting on the bed with his legs crossed. Both of his hands were locked into a mudra, and his little mouth was murmuring something. The baby had an ugly face, and his head was covered with mottled scars that looked like scars. A white pearl the size of a chicken was embedded in the center of his forehead, emitting a faint glow. However, the surface of the pearl was covered with cracks, and a few of them had gone through it. It looked like it would break at any time. A few men rushed into the delivery room with swords and blades in their hands, roaring as they swung their weapons and hacked at the baby. With a blink of his body, Wu Qi brought Eugene and rushed into the delivery room. With a backhand slap, the blades and swords held in the hands of a few men were broken, and the tremendous force knocked them off their feet, causing them to stagger and roll away. Wu Qi stood before the window, looking down at the little baby. Suddenly, he asked in a soft voice, "Little monk, do you still remember me?" The naked baby raised his head and gave Wu Qi a glance. Suddenly, his eyes went wide, and he began to yell at Wu Qi. Two streams of warm tears rolled down from the corners of his eyes. He struggled to his feet and crawled toward Wu Qi while trembling. But, as a newborn baby, his limbs were weak, and he only managed to crawl a few times before he lay down on the bed and could no longer move. Wu Qi did not have time to care about the filth on the baby's body that had not been washed clean. With one swift movement, he carried the baby up and laughed aloud. Excellent. And here I thought I owed you for saving my life. You died this morning, but in the afternoon, you have already reincarnated into the mortal world, and you are even in Anhi City. This is the fate between us. Slapping the baby's butt, Wu Qi suddenly frowned and said, That's right. Strange. How did you reincarnate so fast? Senior, cried Eugene hastily, as long as they are Buddhist cultivators, they always reincarnate very quickly. In the past, there were a few cases where Buddhist disciples died in battles with others. As long as their souls were not destroyed, they would be reincarnated very quickly, and usually, they would be reincarnated in the vicinity of Anhi City. Not only in Anhi City, it is the same in every place where there are Buddhist disciples. Eugene clicked his tongue and murmured under his breath, all the fellow Taoists said that the 6 paths of reincarnation in the 9 underworlds are created by Buddhist cultivators, and that is why they can have such a convenient time. The 6 paths of reincarnation were created by Buddhist cultivators. Wu Qi shook his head disapprovingly. The 6 paths of reincarnation was a Tao formed naturally by the heaven and earth. Who could control it? Who dared to control it? However, he was one of the reasons why Buddhist cultivators were able to reincarnate so quickly. Hefting the baby in his arms, Wu Qi turned to look at the woman lying on the bed, who was struck dumb, and asked, What is the surname of the master of this house? The woman was struck dumb with fear as well. When Wu Qi asked her, she quickly answered, My master's surname is Zhu. Zhu? Monk? Suddenly, Wu Qi roared with laughter. Slapping the baby's buttocks, he thrust the sword of greedy wolf out and cut off the umbilical cord of the baby. Delighted, Wu Qi said, Wonderful. Guarding Heart, oh Guarding Heart, your Buddhist name in the past is really unpleasant to hear. From today onwards, you are Zhu Beiji, the monk Beiji. From now on, I will be your master, and I will definitely teach you all the Buddhist scriptures in Golden Pavilion Temple, so that you will be a monk in your previous life, a monk in this life, and forever a monk in all your lives. Eugene twitched his lips. Why did Senior Greed's words always sound so strange? Nevertheless, it was a good thing that Guarding Heart was reincarnated. But, what about Hidden Heart? Eugene stared blankly at the shattered relic between Guarding Heart, no, Beiji's brows. He was at a loss for words. Right at this moment, a furious roar was heard coming from outside the room, Get the hell out of here now, you evil man. Don't you dare hurt my wife. Wu Qi turned his head and looked over his shoulder. He saw a troop of 50 soldiers, who were sent flying by him just now. They had drawn their bows and aimed at the delivery room. Chapter 444. An official? What official are you? Wu Qi walked out of the room with Beiji in his arms, throwing a cold glance at the young man standing in front of the crowd and scolding him. The young man was tall and burly, and there was an aura of someone who had been through many battlefields in his eyes and brows. Upon seeing Wu Qi's reaction, the man clenched his jaws and said, I'm Zhu Linggong, the garrison guard of Anhi City in Anlu County. Garrison guard? What was this official position? The information related to the human race that Wu Qi obtained from Yu Hehuan through interrogation did not mention this official position. Eugene quickly stepped forward and said, Zhu Linggong is General Zhu. His clan used to be the county governor of Anlu County, and they have been guarding Anlu County for nearly 1,000 generations. However, when Euphoria Heavenly Palace and Jade Pagoda Temple established their sects near Anhi City, many immortal sects of various sizes were following them. As a result, the Zhu clan failed to guard the city well, allowing other immortal sects to gain a foothold in Anhi City. Therefore, the human emperor issued an imperial decree, exiling the entire Zhu clan. Pointing at Zhu Linggong, Eugene continued in a low voice, Zhu Linggong's clan is the last branch of the Zhu clan who stayed in Anhi City. That is to say, at least Anhi City is still the territory of the human emperor, but in fact, they do not have any real power. All the previous city lords have never taken the Zhu clan seriously. This Zhu Linggong, hee. Eugene laughed and did not comment further. However, when Wu Qi spread out his divine will, he discovered that Zhu Linggong's mansion, including the 50 soldiers standing in front of him, only had a total of about 100 people. It was just an ordinary mansion in Anhe City. Zhu Linggong did have a beast soul living in his body, but too bad, its quality was not as good as the beast soul of the wind-breaking wolf of Great Yan's scouting office. Zhu Linggong's overall strength was only at mid-stage Xiantian realm, and the rest of the soldiers were so weak that Wu Qi did not want to comment on them. With a casual point of his finger, all 50 strong bows in the soldiers' hands suddenly turned into powder, and the tension of the bowstrings disappeared abruptly. The 50 soldiers lost control of their arms, causing them to lose their balance. Their arms that were controlling the bowstrings were flung backward, and their bodies spun a few times before falling to the ground in a sorry state. From his sleeve, Wu Qi took out a storage bag and threw it over to the dumbfounded Zhu Linggong. With an indifferent tone, he said, "Let's form a good relationship. This isn't a monster. This is your biological son. It's just that as soon as he was born, he was possessed by this poor Taoist's disciple, Beiji, and reincarnated into this world. This is your flesh and blood, and also my disciple. This is the fate between you and me. If you have any problems in the future, come and find me." Pointing at his own nose, Wu Qi said, "I'm the one who has the final say in Euphoria Heavenly Palace now, and I should be the one who has the final say in the area 1 million miles around Anhe City. So, do you have anything that I like?" Throwing his head back and laughing out loud, Wu Qi carried the squealing Beiji out of the courtyard. It never took much effort to talk to smart people. Zhu Linggong stared blankly for a while, then hurriedly turned around and chased after him. He grabbed Wu Qi's sleeve and said in a low voice, "Immortal Master, you are fated to meet Duke Ling's beloved son. This is Duke Ling's fortune. Now that Duke Ling has prepared a banquet, please. Wu Qi laughed, then lightly patted Zhu Linggong's shoulder and said, "Come and find me after you've made up your mind. There are gold, silver, jewelry, and all sorts of spirit herbs in that storage bag. Your wife is suffering from a great shock after giving birth, so please use these spirit herbs to nurse her back to health. Remember, come and find me after you've made up your mind." With a flick of his sleeve, Wu Qi pushed Zhu Linggong tens of steps back. While laughing, he brought Eugene and returned to the City Lord Mansion. Upon stepping through the main entrance of the City Lord Mansion, Wu Qi casually threw Beiji into Eugene's arms and said, "Eugene, you are fated to meet this kid. Before he can walk and talk on his own, just let him follow you. If you know any Buddhist scriptures, you can read a few of them to him every day." After a brief moment of pondering, Wu Qi said with a strange voice, "As a monk, you must look like a monk, and you must have the awareness of being a monk. From today onwards, don't feed him even a single mouthful of milk. Just feed him some fruit juice. Also, as a monk, get a few servants to serve him when he takes a bath and changes his clothes. Don't let him get close to women since he was young. Since he has become a monk, he must be a pure monk." Eugene had just received Beiji when he suddenly heard Wu Qi's order. His hands trembled, and he nearly threw Beiji away. "TSK, a newborn baby doesn't even drink a single mouthful of milk? That's a little too pitiful." Lowering his head to look at Beiji, he saw that the little fellow had a conflicted expression as well. His little face was contorted, and he was glaring fiercely at Wu Qi. Wu Qi chuckled evilly, then removed the string of beads formed from 18 fleshly body sariras he had fused with his transcendence energy, then carefully placed it around Beiji's neck. He said in a deep voice, "Little monk, you sure have reincarnated. It looks like your Shifu's soul has perished in order to protect you. This is the essence condensed from your Shifu and your fleshly body sariras. Start absorbing it when you are young. It will save you at least several hundred years of hard work." Beiji held the string of beads tightly with both hands, and 2 streams of warm tears rolled down from the corners of his eyes. Wu Qi pondered for a brief moment, then looked at Beiji and said, "Work harder, and grow faster. If you can reach the cultivation base of your Shifu's previous life, I'll give you a chance to kill Taoist Yunzong with your own hands." Hee hee. I can't believe Lao Tzu has taken a monk as his disciple. Feeling a little awkward in his heart, Wu Qi twitched his lips and pinched Beiji's cheek, then walked into the backyard of the city lord mansion leisurely. Madman Shui walked over slowly from the gatehouse, chewing on a piece of braised meat. He came before Eugene and gave Beiji a few glances, then said with a crooked smile, "TSK, this little fellow is a few times uglier than Lao Tzu. Do you want to eat meat? Do you want to eat meat? If you don't talk, I'll think you want to eat meat." Before Eugene could say anything to stop him, Madman Shui pulled off the fattest and greasy piece of meat from the braised meat and shoved it into Beiji's mouth. How could the poor Beiji have the strength to resist Madman Shui, whose cultivation base had improved greatly? He rolled his eyes, straightened his neck, and finally swallowed the piece of fat meat into his stomach. While Madman Shui was torturing Beiji, Lao Ai strode out from a side room, surrounded by a few beautiful female cultivators. Seeing Madman Shui forcing the braised meat into Beiji's mouth, Lao Ai curiously came to Beiji's side. He reached out his hand and flicked the little bird on his crotch, which had a sharp horn protruding out of it. "TSK, this little fellow is interesting. Although he has just been born, he actually has the foundation of the indestructible body of the Buddhist League. With a body like this, if he were to cultivate the Great Sun technique from a young age, I suppose it would be very effective, right? Eugene, where did you get this little fellow? Why does he look so ugly?" Eugene's face scrunched up, and he nearly burst into tears. While Madman Shui was forcing the braised meat into Ba Jie's mouth, a few beautiful female cultivators had already rushed up to him while giggling, and were groping Ba Jie's body in a flurry. They paid special attention to his tiny little bird. A pure monk? Eugene felt like weeping but had no tears as he stared at Beiji, who had his eyes rolled back and was nearly stuffed to death. "In your next life? Ah. Why don't I just strangle you to death right now, and Great Master Guarding Heart, can you reincarnate again?" Lao Ai and Madman Shui, who were stationed in Anhe City, had obtained a novel toy. They snatched the custody of Beiji from Eugene's hand, and began to carry out a cultivation plan named Joyful Monk Breeding, according to their plan. It was needless to say how much suffering Beiji would have to go through in the hands of these two villains. All sorts of strange and bizarre things had completely overturned the worldview and view of life he had in his previous life, making him feel like he was living in hell. But Wu Qi had no time to save him. While Beiji was in a miserable state, Wu Qi had already returned to Greenwood Mountain with 30,000 laborers. The entrance of Greenwood Mountain, which was split open by Wu Qi with a single sword strike, was now leveled into a flat land measuring 100 acres in circumference. 9 jade archways were erected in front and behind, each of which was twice as tall and magnificent as the one in front of them. Wu Qi had invited all the most famous stone carving masters around Anhe City, asking them to design the most gorgeous patterns, and use the brilliant jade of the best quality that could glow at night to polish and process them. He had strived to make the 9 memorial archways look magnificent and flawless. On both sides of the archways were green pines and cypresses that were transplanted from the depths of the mountains. Each of them was a huge tree so thick that it would take a dozen people to wrap their arms around it. The shade of the trees formed a green cloud that stretched from the entrance of Greenwood Mountain all the way to the valley 100 miles deep inside the mountain. Between the huge trees and under the archways was a tunnel paved with golden bricks. It measured 60 feet wide, and was paved with pure golden bricks. The surface of the bricks was polished so smooth that not even a strand of hair could fit through them. Every brick was carved with fine patterns, and when all the patterns were joined together, they formed a huge pattern of a cloud dragon on the tunnel. The dragon's head was under the first archway, and the dragon's tail stretched into the valley 100 miles away. Under the ingenious design of Wu Qi, the valley of Greenwood Mountain had changed its appearance as well. The valley stretched 100 miles long, and the widest part was over 20 miles wide. From the entrance all the way to the bottom of the valley, a total of 18 magnificent palaces were built, each taller and more majestic than the last. They were built with golden bricks and emerald tiles, silver ingots as the walls, and jade bricks as the floor. Not a single trace of soil could be seen on the green grassland between the palaces. Underneath the fine green grass was the emerald sand carefully ground by expert craftsmen using stone mills. At first glance, one could see nothing but greenery. The greenery made one's heart feel refreshed, and a refreshing aura filled the air. Between the palaces were decorated with countless strange stones and trees, as well as all kinds of exotic flowers and herbs. The huge palaces were connected by a cloud bridge that hovered 1,000 feet above the ground. On top of the cloud bridge, exquisite pavilions made from fine jade were seen hovering. Every place, every step, every glance, everything he saw was a peerlessly ingenious idea, a boundless wondrous realm. He had emptied the storehouses of Euphoria Heavenly Palace, Jade Pagoda Temple, and Golden Pavilion Temple, as well as those left behind by other powers of various sizes. Only then was he able to gather all the precious materials and build such a luxurious Taoist Rite temple. Fortunately, Taoist Yunzong had 8 disciples, each of whom possessed the cultivation base of heaven immortals. With their full help, as well as the hard work of 30,000 laborers who had a slight cultivation base, the splendid and beautiful Taoist Rite temple finally took shape in 3 months. When the main building was completed, all that was left were pots and pans, cloud beds, chairs, candlesticks, incense burners, murals, and many other decorations. All of these could be found in Euphoria Heavenly Palace, Jade Pagoda Temple, and Golden Pavilion Temple. Wu Qi had emptied all the decorations in those palaces, then selected the most luxurious ones to fill the Taoist Rite temple. Finally, the Taoist Rite temple was decorated beautifully, and no one could find anything wrong with it. Then, after Wu Qi's suggestion, Taoist Yunzong wrote the words Green City Mansion on the 9 memorial archways with his own hands, then used some expert craftsmen to carve them into horizontal boards. With that, the Taoist Rite temple was officially completed. Over the past 3 months, Wu Qi had been working day and night to build the Taoist Rite temple. Taoist Yunzong had seen it with his own eyes, and remembered it in his heart. As a result, his favorable impression toward Wu Qi was completely indescribable. If not for the help of Wu Qi, a local tyrant, Taoist Yunzong would not have been able to come here with 8 disciples and 4 Taoist apprentices. He was so poor that he even planned to rob a cave abode to stay temporarily. How could he have expected that in just 3 months, there would be such a splendid Taoist Rite temple waiting for him to preside over? Hovering in midair, Taoist Yunzong looked down at the glittering Taoist Rite temple with a great mood. He could not help but sigh contentedly. Wu Qi, who had been busy for 3 months, came before Taoist Yunzong, bowed and said, "Senior Immortal, is it time for us to send out invitations and invite our fellow Taoists to attend the opening ceremony?" Taoist Yunzong raised his brows, stuck out his chest, and said with a loud laugh, "Of course." Therefore, Wu Qi smiled and did not say anything, stepping aside. Chapter 445. Accompanying Taoist Yunzong, Wu Qi took a stroll in Green City Mansion. The scenery was beautiful everywhere, and the scenery changed with every step they took. In order to design this Taoist Rite temple, Wu Qi had brought out all the advantages of the gardens in Jiangnan that Lu Xiaobai had designed in his memory. To describe it with an inappropriate phrase, it was truly a thrilling journey, and every step they took gave people a different feeling. Taoist Yunzang's face was flushed, and he was emitting a faint glow. Under Wu Qi's guidance, he was touring around the mansion in a relaxed and happy mood. It was so beautiful that no words could describe it. The magnificence, and extravagance of this Taoist Rite temple was 100 times beyond Taoist Yunzang's expectation. Never in his wildest dreams did he expect that with the help of Wu Qi, he could actually manage such a Taoist Rite temple in just 3 short months. The furnishings in the palaces and pavilions, the beds, the benches, the tables, and even the writing brushes, pen holders, paperweights, bookmarks, and even the axes used to chop firewood in the kitchen, were all exquisite and time-honored items that were crafted with many precious materials. Among them, the various items looted from Euphoria Heavenly Palace were even more precious. They were dazzling, and this was the best way to describe them. Euphoria Heavenly Palace was a sect of the Evil League, and it mainly practiced dual cultivation techniques. On top of that, Lady Qiao was a lady with a temperament of extravagance. Therefore, the furnishings in the palace were all extremely luxurious. For example, the cloud bed placed on the dais in the first great hall of Green City Mansion was carved out from a piece of purple jade essence, measuring over 100 feet in circumference. At its core was a piece of purple palace divine jade essence, which could condense energy and nourish one's life force, and was extremely beneficial to the immortal soul of an immortal cultivator. That piece of purple mansion divine jade essence was about 10 feet in size, and there was a piece of the same size in Green City. However, it had been cut into over 20 hassocks, which were distributed to a dozen elders and a few core disciples of Green City. How could it be compared to Euphoria Heavenly Palace, which carved it into a cloud bed for them to use? Furthermore, he was being ordered around by only one person. By offering this piece of purple palace divine jade essence to the elders of Green City, it would be a great merit, and Taoist Yun Zong would be rewarded handsomely with cultivation techniques, immortal pills, immortal items, and many other things. And in the 18 palaces and pavilions of this Qingqing villa, there were many such rare items. From this, it could be seen that Panga continent was rich in natural resources, and that Euphoria Heavenly Palace and the other sects had reaped a great harvest after entering Panga continent. Taoist Yun Zong pinched his fingers and did a quick calculation in his mind. If he were to work hard and manage the business step by step, it would take him at least several periods of time. And now, with Wu Qi's help, he had accumulated such a large fortune in just 3 months. Taoist Yun Zhang's hands, feet, and heart were trembling. He began to look forward to the reward he would receive after he presented this Taoist right temple to the seniors of his sect. At the same time, from the disdain he had for Wu Qi in the beginning, it was soon replaced by admiration, and then gratitude. Now, he even began to regard Wu Qi as his best friend. Of course, Taoist Yun Zong knew that Wu Qi had done all this for the sake of Green City behind him. Even so, Wu Qi had done him a great favor, so great that Taoist Yun Zong was too embarrassed to say that he would take Wu Qi as his disciple. In his opinion, Wu Qi was a reasonable and capable man, and he should recommend him to his master. Taoist Yun Zong had his own plan as well. If he took Wu Qi as his disciple, he would have a disciple who could do things, and it would be of great help to him. But, if he had a junior brother who had a good relationship with him, who was capable of doing things, and who was appreciated by his master, would that not bring him even greater benefits? In Green City, having a formidable disciple and a junior brother who had a good relationship with him were two completely different concepts. When he thought of the benefits, Taoist Yun Zong could not help but burst into laughter. Coincidentally, Wu Qi had brought Taoist Yun Zong to the last hall, and was gesticulating while introducing the various benefits of this hall to him. Suddenly, he saw Taoist Yun Zong burst into laughter. "Why are you laughing, Senior Immortal?" Wu Qi asked hastily. Taoist Yun Zong gave a few loud laughs, then patted Wu Qi's shoulder and praised, "Fellow Taoist Greed, from now on, we'll be talking as equals. Don't call me Senior Immortal anymore, or else you'll be treating me like an outsider. Oh, I'll have to rely on you a lot for this matter. I hope you'll accept this small gift." Then, Taoist Yun Zong stretched his hand forward and grabbed a crimson immortal sword, which was bursting with bright sparks. Pointing at the immortal sword complacently, he said with a smile, "This immortal sword is personally crafted by me, and it has been with me for 10 periods. Currently, its item spirit has cultivated to the overall strength of a 33rd tier spirit immortal, but no one has managed to refine it. Today, I'll give it to fellow Taoist Greed." Wu Qi was struck dumb, then hastily put on a flattered look and cried out, "I dare not. I dare not. This is an immortal item. How can I accept such a generous gift from you, Senior Immortal?" Taoist Yunzong pretended to be angry and cried out, "Senior Immortal. Just call me fellow Taoist. If fellow Taoist regards me as a friend, you must accept this flaming magpie sword. Otherwise, I won't accept it." Wu Qi resisted for a while, then finally put on a look as if he could not resist Taoist Yun Zhang's kindness. Reverently, he took over the sword. Under Taoist Yun Zhang's guidance, Wu Qi activated the item spirit in the sword with his own blood essence, then branded a thread of his divine will into the sword spirit. As the immortal sword was personally crafted by Taoist Yun Zhang, Wu Qi did not face any difficulty in refining it, and the sword spirit was very obedient. As a result, Wu Qi did not have to spend too much energy on it. Taoist Yun Zhang had the intention to draw him to his side, and Wu Qi had the intention to fawn on him. On top of that, because of the flaming magpie sword, their conversation became more and more passionate. Taoist Yun Zhang bragged to Wu Qi about the business in outer heavenly realms, while Wu Qi told him some secrets about Panga continent which he had learned from Yu Hehuan and Reverend Sanlo. When the conversation reached a climax, both men went to the great banyan tree at the entrance of the valley, where they set up a banquet and drank to their heart's content. When they were a little tipsy, Wu Qi once again mentioned the matter of inviting the seniors of his sect in Green City to watch the opening ceremony. Taoist Yun Zhang applauded, agreeing with Wu Qi's suggestion. But, when it came to the specific implementation, a troubled expression appeared on his face. He frowned and did not say anything for a long while. After a while, Taoist Yun Zhang lowered his voice and told Wu Qi a few things with a bitter smile on his face. The reason why Taoist Yun Zhang came to Greenwood Mountain in just 10 days to seize the territory was because he was sent by someone. The one who ordered him to seize the territory in Greenwood Mountain was his senior brother, Taoist Yun Zhang. Taoist Yun Zhang possessed a cultivation base of 27th tier Heaven Immortal, while Taoist Yun Zhang had steadily attained the overall strength of 25th tier Heaven Immortal. 3,000 years ago, Taoist Yun Zhang and his senior brothers came to Panga continent to replace the previous batch of disciples from Green City and establish a new Taoist Rite temple. It was extremely difficult for an immortal sect to establish a Taoist Rite temple and establish their own territory on Panga continent. Especially for an immortal sect like Green City, which was guarded by a gold immortal, it was the target that Yu dynasty paid close attention to. Although Green City had sent dozens of disciples to Panga continent in succession, they could only establish a few footholds on the continent. Under the restriction of Yu dynasty, they could not achieve any significant results. Taoist Yun Zhang and Taoist Yun Zhang did not get along well with each other, and the clans behind them were competitors. As a result, their relationship was very bad. Taoist Yun Zhang was the leader of the 36 fellow disciples on this trip to Panga continent, and he had become the unluckiest one among them. He was the one who had to bear all the risks, hardships. As a result, Taoist Yun Zhang immediately sent Taoist Yun Zhang here to establish a Taoist Rite temple. But, anyone with a discerning eye could tell that the current lack of power around Anhui city was only temporary. As long as Patriarch Muji recovered from his injuries, or the Dark Palace behind him could send some old fiends to reinforce him, Anhui city would be completely under the control of the Dark Palace. If Taoist Yun Zhang came here to establish a Taoist sect at this time, wouldn't that mean he was going against Patriarch Muji? Green City's overall strength could not affect Hui Ming Heavenly Realm, and its mighty reputation could not frighten the group of fiend immortals from the Dark Palace. Patriarch Muji was from the Fiend League, and when he found out that a cultivator from the Righteous League had appeared in the territory that he had fought painstakingly for, he would not mind killing Taoist Yun Zhang. Senior brother Yun Zhang, hee. Taoist Yun Zhang grinned coldly and said, "He sent me here to die." But, never in his wildest dreams did he expect that I could make friends with fellow Taoist greed here. With a sincere smile on his face, Wu Qi said seriously, "Green City is the #1 immortal sect in Xianyang Heavenly Realm, and it cultivates the cultivation technique of the profound sect. Although my cultivation base is weak, I have the heart to improve myself. Since we can meet each other, it is fate that brought us together. Naturally, I will do my best to help fellow Taoist." Taoist Yun Zhang nodded satisfyingly. He sighed and said, "Without the sect's decree, I can't return to Xianyang Heavenly Realm and report what happened here to my master, or else I will be severely punished. However, the formation that communicates with the sect is in the hands of senior brother Yunzong. I don't want to share the credit with him." Wu Qi nodded silently. With his help, Daoist Yunzong would be able to take over Anhe City. As long as Wu Qi changed his mind and joined Green City, Anhe City would become Green City's territory. Together with this Daoist Rite Temple, as well as those disciples with excellent spirit roots who were about to be sent here from the common people, the credit would be huge. After all, this was the first Daoist Rite Temple that Green City had built on Panga continent. However, Daoist Yunzong and Daoist Yunzong did not get along well with each other, and there was no way Daoist Yunzong could send the news back to his master through Daoist Yunzong. Otherwise, the credit would be taken by Daoist Yunzong, and it would be too stupid to work for someone else. After pondering for a brief moment, Wu Qi asked, "Is there any other way to send the news back to Green City?" Daoist Yunzong nodded, then said with a frown, "There is another place where there is a public voice transmitting formation that can send messages to outer heavenly realms. But, I have to stay here and prevent Yunzong from finding out what is happening here. Therefore, when it comes to sending the message." Daoist Yunzong turned to look at Wu Qi. Wu Qi immediately nodded his head and promised, "Then, let me handle this matter. Fellow Daoist, you only need to send 2 disciples to accompany me." Daoist Yunzong was overjoyed by Wu Qi's attitude. Without hesitation, he told Wu Qi the nearest place with a public voice transmitting formation. Qing Su Immortal Pass. Chapter 446. Early the next morning, when the sun rose and sprinkled its golden rays across the land, Wu Qi, dressed in a green Daoist robe and a red headband on his forehead, stepped onto a cloud and flew eastward, bringing with him 2 little Daoists and 2 of Daoist Yunzang's disciples. They traveled eastward from Anhe City, crossed 17,000 lofty mountains, crossed 4,900 great rivers, and passed through the territories of 7 provinces of Yu dynasty. At last, there was a floating island floating on the ocean, named Qing Su. On it was a Qing Su Immortal Pass, and it was the destination of Wu Qi and his companions. Among the 5 of them, the 2 little Taoists were the attendants whom Wu Qi brought out from Anhe City, and they both possessed the cultivation base of Jin Dan realm. Their true forms were actually 2 celestial fiend puppets. As for Daoist Yunzang's 2 disciples, Shui Xian and Shui Yi, they were the 2 weakest heaven immortals under Daoist Yunzang. They had transcended their heavenly tribulations 100 years ago, and successfully stepped into the ranks of heaven immortals. If Shui Xian and Shui Yi were in a place like minor heavenly circle realm, they would be powerful enough to establish their own sects, and if Daoist Yunzang were in Puyo heavenly realm, he would have the overall strength of the founding ancestral master of one of the 10 great immortal sections. But in Green City, they were the most inconspicuous disciples, and all they could do was run around and run errands. When they set out, Shui Xian and Shui Yi were in high spirits, and they were very polite to Wu Qi. They did not show any disrespect to Wu Qi just because of his low cultivation base. Both of them knew very well that their master had won a great fortune this time. Once he really established his base in Anhe City and seized the foundation of 1 million miles in circumference, the reward he would receive would be extraordinary. Both of them would have a great rise in status, and they would receive great benefits as well. All these benefits came from Wu Qi. It was Wu Qi's cooperation that allowed them to open up a great situation in just 3 months, which was beyond their wildest imagination. As long as the elders of Green City arrived and Wu Qi told the fiend immortals of Dark Palace that Anhe City had always been Green City's territory, Green City would gain the upper hand in terms of morality and justice. With Green City's formidable overall strength, they would be able to firmly occupy Anhe City. This was a big piece of fat meat. These were all given to them by Wu Qi. Therefore, not only did Shui Xian and Shui Yi not show any arrogance or disrespect in front of Wu Qi, instead, they talked and laughed with Wu Qi all the way, and chatted with Wu Qi very intimately, drawing the relationship between them closer. With a smile on his face, Wuqi flattered Shui Xian and Shui Yi, asking them about Panga continent, the world of immortal cultivators, outer heavenly realms, and the celestial court. Although Shui Xian and Shui Yi possessed low cultivation bases, they were, after all, born in a powerful sect like Green City. Therefore, their experience and knowledge were far beyond that of others. Therefore, they did not take any precautions against Wuqi, and as soon as they opened their mouths, they began to talk nonsense. As a result, some information revealed in their words almost made Wuqi jump with joy. Shui Yi told Wuqi that their ancestral master, Reverend Li Yang, was the favorite of the ancestral master of Green City. As Reverend Li Yang was a wanderer, he always wandered around outer heavenly realms, and occasionally sneaked into Panga continent. Therefore, the ancestral master of Green City, True Lord Green Peak, had used his connections to obtain a complete map of outer heavenly realms and a topographic map of Panga continent from the celestial court. The complete map of outer heavenly realms contained extremely detailed information. As for the topographic map of Panga continent, it could probably cover more than 30% of the current Panga continent. Shui Yi said that just to show off the favor his ancestral master had received. But when Wuqi heard that, his heart skipped a beat, and he managed to hold back the cheer that was about to come out of his mouth. A complete map of outer heavenly realms? A map of more than 30% of Panga continent? That was more than enough. With this map, it should not be difficult for him to find the great desolate Autark Valley, and the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean. As long as he could plot against Reverend Li Yang in Anhe City, Wuqi would be able to go to the Northern Ocean and search for the innate Yang energy with a peace of mind. Once the Yin and Yang energies and the energy of 5 elements were gathered, he would shatter his innate nascent soul and form his innate nascent divinity, and then... A faint smile emerged on Wuqi's face. Suddenly, he pointed at a lofty mountain that towered into the clouds and said, "Fellow Taoists, we've been traveling for more than half a day. Why don't we go up there and have some wine and fresh fruits, and enjoy the scenery?" Shui Xian and Shui Yi were instructed by Taoist Yunzong to go out this time, and everything was decided by Wuqi. They only needed to point out the direction to Qingsu Immortal Pass. Therefore, when Wuqi said that they had been flying for more than half a day, they decided to take a rest in the lofty mountain in front of them. After all, they did not have to be in a hurry to send a message to Green City. Even if Reverend Li Yang received the message and came here immediately, it would be a few years later. There was no need to be in such a hurry. The group of 5 descended on the cloud and landed on the mountain peak. 2 little Taoists brought out a round table and stool, and served Wuqi, Shui Xian, and Shui Yi. Shui Xian and Shui Yi picked up their wine bowls and glanced at the picturesque scenery around them. They could not help but exclaim in admiration. The lofty mountain was the tallest mountain within 10,000 miles of the area. As far as the eye could see, the peaks and valleys looked like a cluster of mountains, and the waves looked like furious waves. Clouds and mists hovered above the mountains and rivers. It was indeed a beautiful scenery. Wuqi picked up his wine bowl and said politely, "Fellow Taoists, we hit it off at first sight. Come, let's drink to our heart's content." Shui Xian and Shui Yi raised their wine bowls and burst into loud laughter, clinking their bowls with Wuqi's, then opened their mouths and poured half a liter of wine into their mouths. It was a fragrant aroma that came straight from one's internal organs, drifting out through the pores and reaching a distance of 20 to 30 feet away. It was an indescribable fragrance. The aroma made Shui Xian and Shui Yi stare blankly, and suddenly, they fell to the ground. Wuqi threw away the wine bowl and rose to his feet slowly, staring coldly at Shui Xian and Shui Yi. He cupped his fist and said with a sigh, Actually, there is no enmity between you and me. But, who asked you to come from a poor background? Are you from Green City? Your master has even killed Hidden Heart and Guarding Heart, who saved my life. You can't blame me for this." The bodies of the 2 little Taoists who served beside him twisted, then slowly expanded and transformed into 2 celestial fiend puppets, each standing 10 feet tall and with a bronze body. Wuqi pointed his finger at Shui Xian and Shui Yi. Immediately, the two puppets transformed into two afterimages and plunged down, easily fusing into their bodies. A strange chewing and swallowing sound rang out from within their bodies. Suddenly, a bright light shone from between their brows, amidst which, two human-shaped immortal souls appeared, standing there blankly like two wooden men. But very soon, countless black threads shot out from their bodies like smoke and mist, tightly binding their immortal souls and slowly dragging them into their bodies, turning them into a black cocoon of light. Their immortal souls were quickly digested, and all their memories were seized by the puppets. Only their true spirits remained, as they were firmly suppressed in the depths of their bodies with a mystic technique. As long as their true spirits remained, even if there were mystic techniques such as soul jade slips in Green City, they would not know that Shui Xian and Shui Yi had been controlled by someone. Very soon, the two puppets rose to their feet, bowed to Wu Qi, and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, Shui Xian and Shui Yi offer greetings." Wu Qi laughed aloud as he cupped his fist and returned the greeting, "Fellow Taoist, you are too courteous. In the future, we will have to work together." The three of them looked at each other and laughed. Two dark shadows shot out from under Wu Qi's feet and slowly transformed into two little Taoists, standing next to Wu Qi with a smile on their faces. This time, Wu Qi did not dawdle. He exerted all his strength, and the group of five broke through the void, rushing towards Qing Su Immortal Pass with teleportation. Along the way, except when they were approaching the cities of Yu Dynasty, when they would cautiously travel through underground using escape arts, they had been teleporting with all their strength. After traveling like this for 1.5 months, they finally came to a vast body of water. It was a large lake surrounded by mountains. Wu Qi unleashed his divine will, but he could not reach the other side of the lake. Strong gusts of wind rolled up the green water of the lake, which smashed against the reefs on the shore and sent up countless white foams. Not far away from Wu Qi and his companions, several thousand long-bow men were working hard. Under the command of a group of heavily armored warriors, they were hammering iron stakes, each about 10 feet thick, on the shore and coiling them with bull-thick alloy chains. Hundreds of such iron stakes and chains were spread across the shore of the lake, covering an area of 100 miles in circumference. Wu Qi scanned them with his divine will. These iron stakes were about 3,000 feet long, and those long-bow men were wielding huge iron hammers and hammering them with all their strength, driving them deep into the reefs on the shore, which were a few times stronger than pig iron. The chains were several hundred miles long, stretching all the way to a far distance. With his good eyesight, Wu Qi saw a group of long-bow men working on the other side of the lake from several hundred miles away. They were grilling meat over a huge bonfire, and the meat being grilled was actually several thousand feet long serpents and flood dragons. Hundreds of serpents and flood dragons were grilled over the bonfire, with fat dripping down from their bodies. While drooling, those long-bow men were excitedly smearing all kinds of spices on the bodies of these serpents and flood dragons. Next to those long-bow men were a large group of about 20,000 feathermen. They were clad in light metal armors, had a pair of wings on their backs, and held bows and arrows in their hands. They were squatting on the cliffs around them, humming folk tunes while watching these long-bow men working. Apart from these feathermen, there were also some people who were born with only one arm and one leg, but each had a third eye on their forehead. They were concocting some kind of ointment, filling hundreds of large water vats with sticky liquid. Fist-sized bubbles kept popping up from the dark liquid. Wu Qi stared blankly at these busy people. It seemed they were planning something big. While he was wondering what these people were going to do, suddenly, several dozens of knights clad in golden armors and mounted on single-horned, winged Pegasi came running at top speed towards Wu Qi. Surprisingly, the leader of the knights was a tall, slender, and beautiful female general. Even from a distance, she shouted at Wu Qi, "Hey, you immortal cultivator, don't bring disaster to your sect. Our prefecture overseer is going to hunt a gale, so leave quickly. If you delay our prefecture overseer's important matter, we'll definitely raze your sect to the ground and kill every single one of you." Wu Qi was stunned. Hunt a gale? Gale? The legendary divine beast Gale. TSK, what a fierce and domineering woman. She kept saying that she would raise his sect to the ground and kill every single one of them. She was way too fierce. While Wu Qi was cursing the woman in his mind, a golden-armored knight had already grabbed a double-edged battle axe and thrown it towards Wu Qi from 3 miles away with the momentum from the galloping Pegasi. A strange whistling noise rang out, as the axe turned into a cold gleam and arrived before Wu Qi in a blink of an eye. Chapter 447. Wu Qi gave a cold snort and pointed his finger forward. When the 3 javelins were still over 1,000 feet away from him, they suddenly froze in the air. Then, he slightly waved his finger. Along with a shrill swishing noise, the 3 javelins darted back at him at a speed that was tens of times faster than when they came, reaching right in front of the burly man. Up in the air, the woman's eye corners twitched with anger. She pointed her finger at Wu Qi and roared, "How dare you? How dare you kill my general right in front of me? You thief, tell me your name if you have the guts." For the span of a few breaths, Wu Qi casually punched out with his fist. The pure strength of his fleshly body shook the surrounding air violently, and the pillar of wind collapsed with a loud boom. The raging force of the wind transformed into countless wind blades that scattered in all directions, and even the ground was sliced and thinned by the wind blades. Dust rose in all directions. Sand and stones wrapped Wu Qi and his companions, making their silhouettes blurry and indistinguishable. Shui Xian flashed across the air and darted in front of Wu Qi. A deafening boom rang out like the ringing of a giant bell. The double-edged battle axe exploded into pieces on Shui Xian's body, splashing all over the ground. The burly man who threw the battle axe roared out in shock. Refusing to believe what just happened, he took out another 3 javelins and threw them towards Wu Qi. Unwilling to let Wu Qi go just like that, the girl flapped the green wings on her back, turned into a beam of green light, and followed closely behind Wu Qi. Shaking his head, Wu Qi gave a long and sonorous roar. Suddenly, a large cloud of earth energy rushed out from under his feet. Along with a deep buzzing noise, the earth energy was transformed into magnetic force by Wu Qi. Bringing up a dazzling dark light, he wrapped Shui Xian, Shui Yi, and the 2 Daoist boys with his sword and flew tens of miles away in a flash. He shouted coldly, "I won't bother with a woman like you. Damn it, I didn't check the almanac when I went out, and I bumped into you bastards." The sword power landed on Shui Xian and Shui Yi's body. Along with a shrill swishing noise, the sword power was shattered and absorbed the surrounding air, transforming into tens of bull-thick, miles-tall tornadoes, spinning swiftly around Wu Qi and the others. These gusts of wind were as dense as stone pillars, clashing and rubbing against each other, causing loud banging noises. The wind pillar swirled up the surrounding air, bringing with it a large number of palm-sized wind blades that slashed at Wu Qi and the others. Looking down condescendingly at Wu Qi, the lady cried out coldly, "3 heaven immortals. Who are you? Where are you going? What are you going to do? Why did he come here? Don't you know that the prefecture overseer has already issued a ban 3 days ago, sealing off the entire area within a radius of 5,000 kilometers and forbidding any cultivators from entering?" With a blink of his body, he teleported several dozens of times within a small area, and each time, he managed to move himself a few feet away, dodging those arrows by a hair's breadth. Accompanied by shrill whistling noises, the arrows brushed past Wu Qi's body and pierced into the reef behind Wu Qi, leaving several miles deep holes in the ground. Wu Qi looked back at those holes and felt his scalp go numb. He did not use any magical power, and fought like a body cultivator who was qualified to be a body cultivator. The lady had just sprung up from the back of the Pegasus and was about to rush down with a long sword in her hand, pointing the tip of the sword straight at Wu Qi's chest. All of a sudden, Wu Qi unleashed a restrictive spell, causing the lady's body to stiffen in midair. She gave a muffled snort in annoyance, then flapped her wings and plunged into her body. A clear cry towered into the sky, as a pair of green wings suddenly sprouted out from her back. With a powerful flap of the wings, several tens of feet long, a whirlwind made of goat horns rose from the ground and rose into the sky. The air around her was filled with a crisp crackling noise, as all the restrictive spells were shattered. The lady transformed into a green shadow and shot up into the sky, hovering several miles above the ground. However, Wuqi's cultivation base was very strong now, and with the help of the magnetic force of the earth, his speed was far faster than any ordinary escape beam. The lady had pursued Wuqi for over 10,000 miles, but she could never get close to Wuqi. On the contrary, Wuqi had gradually pulled a distance of nearly 100 miles away from her. The lady was infuriated, but she had no choice but to turn around and fly back unwillingly. Riding on the Pegasus, the lady warrior came to less than 300 feet away from Wuqi, frowning as she looked at the place filled with dust. Wuqi snorted coldly. He parted the water will and water heart, then leaned forward and dashed out, leaving dozens of afterimages behind him. In just a blink of an eye, he had come before the lady. He slapped the woman in the face and scolded her sternly, "How can you do things like this? It's fine if you threaten me, but before I even say a word, you killed me. What's so great about you?" Between the eyebrows, eyes, throat, heart. Despite the distance of over 100 miles, these feathered men's arrows were so accurate that even Wuqi was shocked. Wuqi snorted coldly, looked at the lady and growled, "Do you think only you have the right to curse and kill people? How can there be such a rule in the world?" Wuqi was infuriated. This burly man really had a death wish. He had spared his life, yet he still dared to speak ill of him. With such a high speed, even those burly men, whose overall strength was not weaker than nascent soul cultivators, did not have the time to react. 3 javelins shot out and came right in front of the burly man's face, sticking closely to his face. As the Pegasus he was riding sped forward, it was as if the javelins were glued to his body. The man was so frightened that cold sweat kept breaking out from his body, and his forehead was dripping with sweat. However, as Wuqi's fleshly body had broken through to the 35 transformations of Heavenly Dragon, the toughness of his fleshly body was beyond anyone's imagination, while Shui Xian, Shui Yi, and the 2 Taoist boys were celestial fiend puppets. They did not have fleshly bodies, but puppets that were 100 times tougher than magical treasures and spirit items. When the wind blades hacked on their bodies, they only produced shrill, unpleasant noises of friction and produced large amounts of sparks, but failed to hurt even a single hair on their bodies. The woman yelled out, "That feels great." Behind her, a green halo emerged, and the huge, green, bird-shaped beast's soul soared into the sky. Countless green light beams darted out of the beast's soul and drilled into the woman's body. Suddenly, the girl's speed increased by more than 10 times. Before Wuqi could throw out his fist, she had already punched 3 times in a row on Wuqi's chest. Each of the punches was as heavy as Mount Tai, and in each of them came an extremely sharp and explosive energy of green element, which came with a tremendous spiraling force, and smashed into Wuqi's body. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps rang out from a distance. Upon hearing the whistle, those longbow men, who were working hard to drive the iron stakes into the ground, threw down their tools and rushed over. It would have been fine if these longbow men did not move, but as soon as they did, a gust of wind immediately formed around them. Strong gusts of wind rose from under their feet, lifting their huge bodies that stood over 10,000 feet tall as they roared and charged towards Wuqi. "No one in the entire Feng province has ever dared to make fun of me," Feng Qingguo. The leader of the team, the female captain, gave a furious cry. Her slender and strong legs clamped down on the Pegasus, then she sped up and rode towards Wuqi. When she was still about 1 mile away from Wuqi, she pulled out the sword hanging on her waist and swung it horizontally across the air. A beautiful green bird shaped like a wand suddenly flashed behind her, and a clear cry rang out. Right after that, a 1,000 feet long green sword beam was spat out from the tip of the sword, and in the blink of an eye, it had come right in front of Wuqi. He gave the burly man a fierce glare. A bright gleam flickered in Wuqi's eyes, as he had activated the mystic technique of mystic eyes of universe that could hurt people with just a glance. His glare made the burly man and Wuqi's eyes meet, and they immediately felt as if they were in the 18th level of hell, with countless little ghosts carrying countless blades, spears, swords, and halberds, cutting and hacking crazily on his body. In an instant, countless tiny bloody wounds appeared on the large man's body. In the blink of an eye, the large man's body suddenly disintegrated, and a bloody soul appeared in broad daylight. After letting out a mournful howl, it suddenly turned into a wisp of green smoke. Wuqi fled at an incredible speed. The woman only saw a blur before Wuqi fled several tens of miles away. The sound of hooves thundered out like thunder as several dozens of golden-armored knights rode over. Cautiously, they stopped about 1,000 feet away from Wuqi, pulled out their weapons, and stared coldly at Wuqi. Flustered and exasperated, the burly man grabbed the 3 javelins that were almost glued to his face, pointed them at Wuqi, and growled, "You bastard! Tell me your name." Wuqi did not move, and neither did Shui Xian. Shui took a step forward and stood shoulder to shoulder with Shui Xian in front of Wuqi. Among the several thousand longbow men, a dozen of them had an aura comparable to that of heaven immortals. Among the tens of thousands of feather men, there were also a few who had the aura of a heaven immortal. On top of that, the woman in front of him was terrifyingly fast, and her strength was not to be underestimated. Immediately, Wuqi gave up the impulse to argue with these people. Wuqi performed an incantation gesture with both hands, pointed his finger at the woman, and cried out sternly, "Freeze!" With a muffled snort, Wuqi was knocked flying backward and slammed heavily into Shui Xian and Shui. The innate yin energy in his body surged, and suddenly, Wuqi's body became several hundred times softer and more feminine than the water of extreme yin. His body was wriggling slightly, and in the instant of the collision, his body vibrated hundreds of thousands of times. In just a blink of an eye, the 3 powerful forces that the woman had smashed into his body were expelled out of his body and sent into Shui Xian and Shui Yi's body. Staring at Wuqi, the woman clenched her jaws fiercely, then suddenly gave a shrill whistle. The woman reacted very quickly. As soon as Wuqi slapped her, she immediately gave a backhand slap and parried Wuqi's palm. Wuqi gave a startled cry and gave her another slap with his left hand. However, the woman was a little faster than Wuqi. She parried Wuqi's slap again, then thrust her palm towards Wuqi's face. Wuqi gave a furious roar. His arms moved like a gust of wind, leaving numerous afterimages behind as he transformed into 1,000 armed guanyin, thrusting his fists down like shooting stars. Loud flapping noises of wings echoed out, as several tens of thousands of feathermen from several hundred miles away soared into the sky. Like a large dark cloud, they let out cheers of joy and swarmed towards Wuqi from all directions. While they were still over 100 miles away from Wuqi, a dozen feathermen with very strong cultivation base had already drawn their bows and shot several dozens of arrows towards Wuqi like a storm. The furious voice of the lady could be heard echoing through the air, "Pass my order. That evil Daoist must have gone to Qing Su Immortal Pass to run some errands. Order the guards of Qing Su Immortal Pass to capture him alive. I'm going to skin him alive." Shui Xian and Shui Yi gave a loud cry. Their bodies shot backward like cannonballs, smashing brutally into a lofty mountain several tens of miles away. A loud boom rang out as the mountain, which stood several miles tall, crumbled abruptly. Countless fist-sized rocks shot in all directions. Shui Xian and Shui Yi had transferred all the strange forces in their bodies out, then their bodies flashed and returned before Wuqi. Chapter 448. After flying for over 30,000 miles above the lake, a dark shadow suddenly appeared on the surface of the lake, which had turned dark green. Wuqi focused his eyes and looked in that direction. It was a huge black turtle, its back measuring over 4,000 miles in circumference. It was floating on the surface of the lake with a small island on its back. Its neck and limbs were shrunk into its shell, and only its tail, about 100 miles long, was floating lazily on the surface of the lake. Occasionally, it would drop its tail and raise a huge wave that was over 10,000 feet high. When the waves hit the surface of the lake, they produced muffled booms that sounded like thunderclaps, sending the foam flying dozens of miles away. When the sunlight shone on the white foam, it looked like a rainbow was hanging high up in the sky. This was Qingsu Immortal Pass, the market closest to Anhui City where immortal cultivators openly gathered on Panga continent. Originally, this lake was a huge mountain range that stretched for billions of miles. Many years ago, the successor of an almighty immortal secretly established a Taoist Rite temple in this mountain range to preach the Tao. In its heyday, it had recruited several 100,000 mortal disciples to preach the Tao and cultivate there. As a result, the official of Yu dynasty was infuriated, and a greedy prefecture overseer sent an army to besiege the mountain range. The war lasted for 2 years, and the entire mountain range was sunk by tens of thousands of miles, turning into a huge lake. As a result, the almighty immortal flew into a rage. He summoned his friends and brought a large group of powerful immortals to Panga continent to seek an explanation. The almighty immortal even had a nepotistic relationship with a few of the most powerful figures in the celestial court. As a result, after a series of public relations, the prefecture overseer was stripped of his position and demoted to a commoner, and the titles of several hundred generals who participated in the siege were stripped. The almighty immortal was still brooding over this result. So, he simply found an ancient giant turtle from an outer heavenly realm and threw it into the lake, built an island on its back, and opened a market for immortal cultivators. Obviously, the almighty immortal was too stingy, and had purposely built such a market to annoy the people of Yu dynasty. Unfortunately, he had a strong backer, and the current human emperor was too weak to do anything to him. Therefore, Qingsu Immortal Pass had been developing until now. But, after all, this was Panga continent, the nominal territory of the human emperor. Therefore, Yu dynasty had to maintain its dignity. Therefore, the human emperor set up a garrison on this small island, and assigned a general to lead an army of 100,000 to guard this place. He named it Qingsu Immortal Pass. Immortal Pass, was the meaning of customs. When immortals entered or left, they had to report to the guardian general's yamen and receive their identity documents. On top of that, only immortals who had obtained an identity certificate could freely enter and exit the human cities on Panga continent. For a cultivator like Wu Qi, even though he was a disciple of Euphoria Heavenly Palace, if he mistakenly entered a place governed by a prefecture overseer, he would be killed, and none of the ministers of Yu dynasty would have to take responsibility for him. On the other hand, if Wu Qi could obtain an official identity certificate from an official garrison of Yu dynasty, such as Qingsu Immortal Pass, after registering his identity, background, and sect, he would be able to freely enter and exit the human cities, and those ministers of Yu dynasty would not be able to kill a cultivator like him. After all, some cultivators from outer heavenly realms came to Panga continent to purchase some cultivation materials from the official markets of Yu dynasty, and the officials of Yu dynasty had earned an astronomical amount of profit from these transactions. Therefore, those immortal cultivators who had obtained an official identity certificate could not be killed at will. Isn't it just an identity certificate? Wu Qi retracted the escape beam, changed into a new Taoist robe, and slightly adjusted his visage. After that, he retracted all 4 celestial fiend puppets back into his body, then stepped onto a watery cloud and drifted slowly towards Qingsu Immortal Pass. When he was still about 100 miles away from Qingsu Immortal Pass, a group of several dozens of human warriors were seen approaching slowly in the void ahead, driving a dragon-shaped flying ship. Standing on the prow of the ship was a captain with a scroll of portrait in his hand. He studied Wu Qi from head to toe for a while, then shouted, "Hey, immortal cultivator, where are you from? What are you going to Qingsu Immortal Pass for? Do you have any companions?" With his keen eyesight, Wu Qi saw the faces of people through the scroll of portrait. 3 adults and 2 Taoists. Obviously, they were the faces of Wu Qi and his companions when he was fighting with Feng Qinggu just now. Smacking his lips, Wu Qi sighed with emotion at the efficiency of the official forces of Yu dynasty, then cupped his fist and said, "Fellow Taoist, I'm Greed, and I'm going to Qingsu Immortal Pass to purchase some herbs. I've always been alone, and I don't have any companions. The captain gave a cold snort, then grabbed a round mirror tied on his belt and waved it at Wu Qi. A misty yellow light sprinkled onto Wu Qi's body, and a faint green gleam suddenly flashed across the mirror. The captain sneered and said, "How dare a mere peak-stage nascent soul cultivator travel across Qingsu?" Humph. Fiercely pointing his finger at Wu Qi's nose, the captain snapped, "After you enter the island, you will have to go to the town center to apply for an identity certificate. If a cultivator without an identity certificate takes a wrong step on the island, he will be killed. If he dares to cause trouble, he will be killed. If he dares to talk nonsense, he will be killed. In short, if you refuse to apply for an identity certificate, I have 10,000 reasons to kill you. Do you understand?" Wu Qi bowed and did not say a word. The captain gave Wu Qi a fierce glare and cursed under his breath, then waved his hand and ordered the flying ship to move forward slowly. The cloud behind them moved, and 13 flying ships of the same size slowly flew out from it, following behind the flying ship from a distance. Wu Qi gave the 13 flying ships a glance. Each of them was fully armed with soldiers, and there were at least 3,000 of them in total. Twitching his lips, Wu Qi cursed under his breath, "Do they have to go to such lengths just for me? How many humans are there on Pangu continent? Why are there so many soldiers running around all the time?" After giving the flying ships a glance, Wu Qi shook his head and said, "Apart from a few captains whose overall strength is close to heaven immortals, and those middle-ranked captains whose cultivation base is comparable to nascent soul cultivators and Jin Dan cultivators, the rest are just ordinary soldiers. What can they do when facing cultivators? To court death?" Wu Qi thought for a while, and found that neither Yu Huan's confession nor Shui Xian and Shui Yi's memories had anything to do with these ordinary soldiers. Nevertheless, Wu Qi had a feeling that the human race would not be so stupid. Surely, these ordinary soldiers would not be sent to court death when fighting cultivators, right? Since they were on the flying ships, they must have their reasons. But, Wu Qi still could not figure out what the purpose of these soldiers was. With a flick of his sleeve, Wu Qi continued to fly forward slowly on the cloud. When he was still 30 miles away from Qingsu Immortal Pass, his body suddenly became heavy, and the cloud nearly shattered to pieces. A restrictive spell had been cast on this place, and the further he went, the stronger the spell became. By the time Wu Qi arrived on the island, the strength of the spell had reached a level that made one speechless. Apart from heaven immortals, no cultivators could fly here, and could only walk on their feet. Vaguely visible signs of divine will could be seen in the void, guiding him to follow them all the way until he arrived at the area of the island that was close to the turtle head. Glancing around, he found that the natural energy on the island was being pushed away by a tremendous force. As the natural energy on the island was very thin, apart from heaven immortals with formidable cultivation base, any cultivators below the realm of nascent divinity would become no different from immortal if they depleted all their energy. On top of that, the ground was paved with a thick layer of spirit-repelling black loathsome iron. It was a strange ore that had a very strong resistance to the Tao of 5 elements, and could prevent all natural energy from passing through it. It was often used by immortal cultivators to build their treasure vaults, as it could effectively prevent all escape arts from passing through. Right after Wu Qi landed on the island, a pair of men clad in a long black linen robe and tall black crowns came up to him with quick steps. They cupped their fists toward Wu Qi and said with a stern face, "This way. Is this your first time coming to Qingsu Immortal Pass? Prepare 10 pieces of low-grade spiritual stones to handle your identity certificate." Wu Qi gave them a look, then followed them and walked along a path, heading towards a pitch-black palace ahead of them. It was a place filled with pitch-black, square-shaped stone palaces that looked exactly the same. In front of each palace stood a huge stone pillar, the top of which was sunken and filled with sticky kerosene. A green flame soared to over 10 feet high, and even though it was broad daylight, the green flame still gave the surrounding a wretched shade of green. Cultivators kept landing here, and men clad in the same black clothes and black hats came up to them, leading them to follow Wu Qi into the palace. Wu Qi turned around and gave those cultivators a glance. The weakest among them were peak-stage Xiantian realm, while the strongest among them were middle-grade heaven immortals. But, regardless of their cultivation base, when faced with these men clad in black clothes and black hats, who did not possess any cultivation base or aura of an expert, all the cultivators just followed them with a gloomy face. None of them said a word. This was the deterring power of Yu dynasty to immortal cultivators. Compared to them, outer heavenly realms were much better. At least, those immortal monarchs and immortal officials of the celestial courts still dared to attack the protector of the land sent by Yu dynasty. But, on Pangu continent, it seemed the power of Yu dynasty had completely suppressed the arrogance of immortal cultivators. Apart from a few territories that were invaded by immortal sects, like Anhui city, the rest of the territories were completely under the rule of Yu dynasty. Wu Qi thought to himself that perhaps the existence of places like Anhui city had something to do with Qing Su Immortal Pass. Perhaps it was because of the bad precedent set by Qing Su Immortal Pass that the immortal sects could invade Pangu continent with ease, and the reaction of Yu dynasty became softer. Otherwise, with the overall strength of Yu dynasty, the power behind Anhui city was merely Patriarch Muji and Arhat Wrath, and they would have long destroyed all the immortal sects around Anhui city. Wu Qi followed the two men into the grand hall. The hall was filled with long tables, and behind each table sat a scholar with a stiff expression. Wu Qi followed the two men and came before one of the tables. The scholar sitting behind the table asked with a gloomy face, "Name, background, cultivation technique, Taoist League, Buddhist League, Demon League, Ghost Cultivator, or, Qing Su Immortal Pass does not welcome cultivators from the Fiend League. Those Demon League and Ghost Cultivators who like to feast on blood should behave themselves as well. Also, if you are carrying any prohibited items, such as heavenly ghosts from the Ghost Realm, you are not allowed to enter Qing Su Immortal Pass." From the drawer under the table, the scholar pulled out a book as thick as a brick and threw it over to Wu Qi. The cost of the identity certificate is 10 lower-grade energy stones, and this book, 1000 Restrictive Rules of Qing Su Immortal Pass costs 100 lower-grade energy stones. That's a total of 125 lower-grade energy stones. Wu Qi was struck dumb. Holding the thick book in his arms, he asked, 110 lower-grade energy stones? How come it is 125 lower-grade energy stones? The scholar and the two men standing next to Wu Qi gave him a glare at the same time. The man standing on the left of Wu Qi snapped in a low voice, "You immortal cultivators, it is easy for you to earn money. If you cause any trouble in Qing Su Immortal Pass, won't you need our help to deal with it?" Wu Qi was enlightened. So, the other 15 lower-grade energy stones were the payment for their hard work? Grinning, Wu Qi made up a story about his identity and background, then fished out 2 middle-grade energy stones and placed them on the table. The scholar put the 2 middle-grade energy stones directly into his pocket. Instead of giving Wu Qi the change, he gave Wu Qi a small token forged from black iron on top of the identity certificate. He squeezed out a smile and said, "This token proves that fellow Taoist has a pure character and is an orthodox cultivator. It will be more convenient for you to travel on the island." Wu Qi opened his mouth, but did not say anything. Clenching his teeth, he took over the identity certificate made from white paper and the iron token that weighed less than 1 kilogram. Chapter 449. The total cost of the iron sheet did not exceed 10 coins, which proved that Wu Qi was a man with a pure character. "It means I'm a good man." Wu Qi fiddled with the iron medallion tied to his belt as he strolled on the street of the largest immortal market in Qing Su Immortal Pass. He grumbled, "Just a piece of iron skin like this for 75 low-grade spirit stones? A good man? Your whole family is good people, and your mother is the best of the best. That's why she gave birth to you bastards." There were nearly 10,000 shops in this street called Qing Su Immortal Square, and about 1 million immortal cultivators were stationed here. The number of cultivators who came and went varied. When there was a good item, the number of cultivators would increase by leaps and bounds in a single day, but when there was nothing good, no one would come here for 3 to 5 years. The antique shops in the mortal world were particular about not opening for business for 3 years, but when they did, they would eat for 3 years. And the slogan of the shops in Qing Su Immortal Square was, not opening for business for 10,000 years, but when they did, they would eat for 10,000 years. Some shops might not be able to make a deal even in 300 to 500 years, but as long as they were lucky enough to find a good item and auction it at a high price, not only would they have all the materials they needed to cultivate for the next 10,000 years, they would also have all the materials needed by a small sect behind them. As he was not in a hurry to send a message to the people in Green City, Wu Qi strolled on the street in a carefree manner, fiddling with the iron medallion while glancing at the passers-by from time to time. The clothes and appearances of immortal cultivators were very strange, and apart from the people of Long Bow Kingdom, he could see cultivators of all kinds of strange races. There were also winged people, one-armed, one-legged three-eyed people, people born with a large hole in their chests, and people with 2 faces on the front and back of their heads, with the expressions of the 2 faces being the exact opposite of each other. These people were all subspecies of human beings, and they belonged to the same human race. Apart from the people of Long Bow Kingdom who could not transcend their thunder tribulation, the difficulty of cultivating immortal Tao for these subspecies was about the same as that of human beings. Furthermore, these strange subspecies had all kinds of strange innate divine abilities, and the spells they cultivated were usually much stronger than those of normal human cultivators. Therefore, in Qing Su Immortal Square, the most common cultivators were the human race, while the rest were the cultivators of these strange subspecies. Apart from the crowds of cultivators, armored patrolling soldiers could be seen walking on the street from time to time. These soldiers were all human beings. Apart from the officer who possessed a beast's soul, the rest looked ordinary, and did not emanate any energy aura. However, wherever these patrol squads passed, even those proud heaven immortals would cautiously make way for them. No one was willing to offend them. The officers and soldiers of the patrol team looked at all the cultivators around them with vigilant eyes. It was as though these cultivators were all serious criminals. Occasionally, when someone glanced at Wu Qi and noticed the small iron medallion hanging on his waist, these soldiers would glance at it and no longer pay any attention to Wu Qi. Wu Qi nodded his head silently. That scholar was a little greedy, but the little iron medallion he gave Wu Qi did have some effect. Those lower-grade energy stones were worth it. Energy-rotting ghost mushroom. Wu Qi's ears twitched violently. Right when the name energy-rotting ghost mushroom came out of his mouth, his body turned blurry, and in the blink of an eye, he was already in front of the wooden building. Wu Qi's ears twitched violently. Right when the name energy-rotting ghost mushroom came out of his mouth, his body suddenly turned blurry, and with a teleportation, he arrived in front of the wooden building. A few swooshing noises rang out as a few dark shadows flashed around Wu Qi, as a few cultivators dressed in Taoist robes also arrived with teleportation. Wu Qi and the few cultivators exchanged a few glances, then all of them turned to look at Wu Qi in astonishment. To be able to use the divine ability of teleportation in Qing Su Immortal Pass, it could only be done by someone who possessed the overall strength of a heaven immortal. However, the aura emanating from Wu Qi was clearly that of a peak-stage nascent soul cultivator. It was different from deliberately concealing one's aura. When a heaven immortal concealed his aura, he could disguise himself as a mortal. But, no matter how a heaven immortal concealed his aura, he could not make his aura reveal the unique aura of a nascent soul cultivator. Besides, how could a nascent soul cultivator break through space and teleport? The few heaven immortals stared blankly at Wu Qi. For a moment, they had all forgotten the purpose of their visit. Meanwhile, Wu Qi gave them a smile, then rushed into the building and shouted at the top of his voice, "Where is the energy-rotting ghost mushroom? How much is it? I'll buy it from you." Inside the lobby, the few managers sitting behind the counters raised their heads and looked at Wu Qi at the same time. 2 middle-aged men standing before the counter, whose cultivation base was roughly at the level of Jean Dan, shrunk back nervously, shielding an object glinting with a bright green glow placed on the counter. The other heaven immortals who arrived at the same time as Wu Qi were taken aback, then hastily rushed into the building after him. An old Taoist, who was short and shriveled, had a greenish face that made him look like a green-skinned zombie, and was so ugly that he could scare anyone to death, cried out sternly, "Wait! Energy-rotting ghost mushroom? If it is a real energy-rotting ghost mushroom, I'll exchange it with an immortal item." The atmosphere in the lobby immediately turned very strange. A few cultivators who were doing business in the lobby cautiously retreated to the foot of the wall, staring at Wu Qi and the few heaven immortals with vigilance. Two middle-aged cultivators shuddered with fear, then hastily picked up the object placed on the counter. Behind the counter, a fat and round manager, clad in a light blue long robe embroidered with gold patterns, walked out hastily like a meatball and bowed to Wu Qi and the others. "Fellow immortal masters, please forgive me for not welcoming you earlier. I'm Zi Bei, the manager of this Myriad Herbs Hall. Myriad Herbs Hall is the property of immortal monarch Zi Luo. I believe you must have heard of our name, immortal monarch." With just a few words, Zi Bei told them about his background. After that, he pointed at the two middle-aged men and said smilingly, "It was these two fellow Taoists who cried out just now, which brought all of you here, immortal masters." The muscles on Zi Bei's face were twitching, and his heart was throbbing painfully. There was a complicated look in his eyes as he stared at the two Jin Dan cultivators, his eyes filled with blame. Wu Qi was amused. He pointed at the two Jin Dan cultivators and asked, "The energy-rotting ghost mushroom belongs to them?" Myriad Herbs Hall has not purchased their energy-rotting ghost mushroom, right? In other words, they are still the owners of the energy-rotting ghost mushroom? The fat on Zi Bei's body began to tremble violently. Clenching his teeth in pain, he said, "Senior, please understand. These two fellow Taoists, just when they took out the energy-rotting ghost mushroom, they cried out, and all of you immortal masters came here immediately. This energy-rotting ghost mushroom is indeed their personal item." The few managers of Myriad Herbs Hall had an unsightly expression on their faces. The way they looked at the two Jin Dan cultivators was enough to kill them. If not for the presence of Wu Qi and a few other uninvited guests, perhaps they would have already torn these two Jin Dan cultivators into pieces. Wu Qi smiled. He had a rough idea of what had happened here. Two Jin Dan cultivators had come to Myriad Herbs Hall with a parcel, asking to sell some herbs. Judging from the shabby attire of these two Jin Dan cultivators, the managers of Myriad Herbs Hall did not bring them to the room on the upper floor, which was specially used to purchase precious herbs. When the energy-rotting ghost mushroom appeared, one of the managers let out a small cry, while the two Jin Dan cultivators intentionally shouted out loud. They were two very cunning Jin Dan cultivators. Wu Qi gave them a glance, giving them a label in his mind. The loud shout was the finishing touch, as it had attracted Wu Qi and the 7 heaven immortals behind him. With that, the price of the energy-rotting ghost mushroom could not be lowered any further. Shaking his head, Wu Qi turned to the two simple and honest Jin Dan cultivators and asked, "Fellow Taoists, before you came to Myriad Herbs Hall, did you know that this is an energy-rotting ghost mushroom?" I thought you at least know how precious it is, don't you?" The two Jin Dan cultivators exchanged a glance, then gave Zi Bei a cautious look. One of them nodded and said, "We brothers do know the name of the energy-rotting ghost mushroom, but we dare not be sure if this is the real deal. That's why we came to Myriad Herbs Hall to have a look at it, managers. The few of you have a pair of sharp eyes, and with just one glance, you could tell that this is indeed an energy-rotting ghost mushroom. That's why we brothers cried out in surprise. Please excuse us, senior immortals." Wu Qi smiled. It was as he had expected. As the two brothers were not sure what exactly the thing in their hands was, they came to Myriad Herbs Hall. They did not want to sell the energy-rotting ghost mushroom to Myriad Herbs Hall. Therefore, once they confirmed that this thing was indeed the treasure they thought it was, they immediately cried out. There were many heaven immortals in Qing Su Immortal Pass, and many of them had a keen eye. The name of the energy-rotting ghost mushroom was more than enough to attract a satisfied customer. While Wu Qi was laughing inwardly, Zi Bei turned to the two cultivators with a gloomy face and said, "So, you are trying to make us, Myriad Herbs Hall, appraise it for you for free?" there is no such logic under the heaven. The green-skinned, ugly old Taoist rolled his eyes and roared furiously at Zibei, nonsense. What logic? In short, Myriad Herbs Hall has yet to buy this energy-rotting ghost mushroom, and these two brothers are still its owners. Therefore, we are offering a price to buy it. What does this have to do with Myriad Herbs Hall? Cut the crap, or I'll wipe out Myriad Herbs Hall. Do you think Zi Luo Immortal is that great? If he has what it takes, he can come here right now. Otherwise, I can kill you like killing chickens. Zibei's body was shivering with anger. But, since they have entered Myriad Herbs Hall and presented this energy-rotting ghost mushroom to, he said in a flustered and exasperated manner. Zibei did not have the chance to finish his words, because the green-skinned old Taoist casually pointed his finger out and unleashed a green flame. Zibei howled miserably as the green flame hovered around him for a while, burning him alive into ashes. In for a penny, in for a pound, the old Taoist went all out. The green flame flew around the hall for a while, burning a few innkeepers and waiters of Myriad Herbs Hall, as well as a few customers in the room to death. Another old Taoist, clad in a black Taoist robe, casually pointed his finger at the back. Immediately, all the doors of Myriad Herbs Hall were shut with a series of crackling noises. A layer of dark blue phosphorescent flame lingered on the doors. Obviously, he had cast an extremely vicious restrictive spell on the doors. Another old Taoist clad in Taoist robes leaped into a gust of chilly wind and rushed straight up to the second and third floor of Myriad Herbs Hall. In just a blink of an eye, they had killed all the people there, leaving not even their bodies behind. Then, they looted all the medicinal herbs in the storeroom and put them into 7 storage bags. 7 storage bags filled with medicinal herbs were casually thrown on the ground. The green-skinned old Taoist rubbed his palms and said smilingly, "Good. So, shall we follow the old rule?" Wu Qi looked at the 7 heaven immortals around him, took a few steps back cautiously and said, "What old rule?" The green-skinned old Taoist laughed dryly and said, "Energy-rotting ghost mushroom will go to the highest bidder. As for the rest, they will take all the medicinal herbs in Myriad Herbs Hall." The other heaven immortals nodded and agreed with Chi-Chi. After a brief moment of pondering, Wu Qi nodded his head as well. Qing Su Immortal Pass was indeed a deadly place. In just a few breaths of time, every single person in Myriad Herbs Hall was killed. None of these heaven immortals were easy to deal with. But no matter what, Wu Qi was determined to obtain the extremely vicious spirit herb, the energy-rotting ghost mushroom. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.